Okay, welcome everyone. We will call the meeting of the Finance Committee of Tuesday the 9th of April open at 9:30. That clock's right now?
It is.
When did that happen? Well done. Looks like a new clock, is it? So rather than changing the time, we just got new clocks for everyone. What budget did that come out of?
No, the old clocks were 1940s attached to a wire where you just went to one place and changed it. Seriously,
oh, okay.
All the clocks in the building
went to the same place.
Changed, but that system is too much to replace. So.
Okay. All right. So we'll be typing your questions today. Okay, so I've called the meeting to order. We have apologies for Martin for partial absent. Which part of you is going to be absent, Martin?
Last 10 because I'm attending the funeral of Janet Franks, one of our prominent leaders in the Russian and ethnic community, and then I'll try and get back later on. So that's it's a civic role I'm playing.
Okay, thank you. Angela for early departure, and James thinks he will be leaving sometime, but is not too sure when that'll be. Okay, I'll move the apologies. Mallet, Bunting, those in favour, those against, carried. Thank you. Confirm the agenda. I just want to raise your the point that our first of our external presenters, which is item 7 on the agenda, New Zealand Local Government Funding Agency, Mark Butcher can't be here. What we're hoping we can do, because it's reasonably important that we get this approved, because it is the statement of intent, which is our agreement with what they want to go forward to do this year. So what we'll do is we will take the report as read. If there are questions that need to be answered, we can do that through email through to Rebecca, and we'll get those questions back to us. And if there's anything beyond that, we may have to bring this back to a special meeting, but I'd hope we can avoid that. This is pretty straightforward stuff.
Yeah, the report's fairly straightforward. The statement of intent has been worked through by the Shareholding Council and has just been presented to all councils to finalise. So it's a straightforward report. And Mark was going to be here. He's just had an emergency with his wife, so he could not be here at the last second. So, yeah, so that's the reason for the comments. Okay, and also we are looking to finish the meeting no later than 2 o'clock if possible, because of course we have the extraordinary council meeting at 2. Yes, Dave.
It's on the chair, doesn't it?
Okay, given what I've just said, can we confirm the agenda? I'll move we confirm the agenda. Mallet, Casson, those in favour, those against, carried. Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? No declarations of interest, thank you. Do we have any speakers? I see Roger at the back there. Not speaking today, Roger? I'm not speaking today. Well, congratulations, thank you. Confirmation. Okay, item 6, confirmation of the Finance Committee meeting of the 21st of February.
Item 5.
Item 5, beg your pardon, sorry, page 6. There was just one item which I was going to follow up, and I have just quickly before the meeting advised Tracy. At my my chair's report on that meeting, which was commended by you, Roger, thank you very much, asked about cost-benefit work, and we were going to get some sort of workshop, I think, or briefing on that. That hasn't happened yet, but will happen somewhere on the line, won't it? Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions or concerns about the minutes? All right, I'll move that they be received. Do I have a seconder? Mallet, Casson, those in favour, those against, carried. Thank you. Okay, the first of our reports, accessible item 6, page 18, Accessible Properties New Zealand Limited, Quarter 1 and Quarter 2 activity reports.
Tēnā koutou, ko Julie Sanderson tōku ingoa. He kai whakahaere mātua ngā rawa rauta ki a hau. Hello, my name's Julie Sanderson and I'm Acting Unit Manager of Strategic Property. I'm here today to present the 6-monthly Assessable Properties Report. The purpose of the report is information only and there are no decisions to be made today. I'd just like to point out that it's the final time that this report will come to the committee. Council received full and final settlement, and in future all reports will go to the community committee. Are there any questions?
Yeah, just one, just for clarity, just so everyone is aware, the loan that was outstanding has been repaid,
Yes.
and that is what it was the loan that caused us to get their financial reporting. We now no longer need to get that financial
That's
reporting
correct.
because the loan has been repaid. Okay.
They have an obligation to provide a management activity report for a further 7 years, but that does not include financial information.
So that's information about tenancies, rents going up or going down, maintenance that's been done on the properties or not, and things like that.
That's
Okay,
correct.
thank you. Okay, do I have any? Martin, have you pushed the button? Yeah, okay. No, good. Thank you.
Look, sorry, I didn't quite hear you. Are we, in future, just help me with, this gets reported, is it through community services?
Yes.
So obviously that, under the umbrella of what we would call social housing?
Yes.
Is part of that. That's
Yes.
good. No, thank you very much.
I just have a kind of a, there seems to be quite a bit of work has been done on the units and on the properties. The hard question for you to ask, but I'm going to try. Would council have been able to do all those things that Assessable have been done?
So I met with the tenancy manager about 2 weeks ago. So she was actually our senior tenancy officer when the complexes were sold. So she went with the properties. So she, I guess, has a really good take.
She was your chattel, was she?
Yeah. She has a really good take on before and after. And I asked her if she felt that there had been an improvement for the tenants, and she did. They have completed quite a lot of work that we would have liked to have done and were unable to do. Things like accessible car parking, level access showers, heaters now going into all the properties. So, yeah, her feeling was that, yes, there had been a big improvement for the tenants.
That's great. All right. Thank you very much. Okay. Paula.
Thank you. Good morning. Just out of interest, because you've got quite a lot of original tenants, so they're obviously, I'm assuming that they'll be content to stay there. That's the largest part, and 34 new tenants. Just trying to get an impression, since you're in this game of social housing, how much more demand you're seeing? Do you have like waiting lists, or are you seeing people coming and asking for this kind of accommodation? How's the world out there as far as social housing goes, from your perspective?
I can't answer that. I can find out for you. The tenancy manager did suggest that as far as housing for the older person is concerned, that we only took aged persons, that had declined somewhat, and that they were looking at more disability and things like that.
Okay, so yes, through you, Mr. Chair, I'd just love to have some more information of that, because it's really relevant to how we go forward with social housing initiatives.
I can find out.
Thank you.
Dave.
Thanks. Regarding Gary's question about whether things have improved since Accessible Properties took it over or not, you mentioned one particular piece of work that wasn't able to be done beforehand. I think you said accessible parking. Can you tell me if staff at the time, any of the times we owned those properties, ever put a proposal for maintenance or upgrade to council that didn't get accepted by council?
I don't know the answer to that, but I can find out for you.
It's all right, I do know the answer. There has never been anything put up that we didn't approve. So I think the question got an answer that was made for the chair's good, not in reality a factual answer, I'm afraid.
Okay, any more questions? All right, I'll move the report. Do I have a seconder? Mallet Ryan, beg your pardon, Mallet Hamilton. Any debate? Okay, those in favour. Oh, sorry, Dave.
I wasn't going to enter into this question or discussion, but some of your question in particular, Mr. Chair, raised my ire a bit. I'd like to point out to people that while Accessible Properties is doing a good job, in my opinion, of managing these and to the standard that we asked for, I am rueing the fact that this council, the previous council, didn't keep ownership of those properties, because looking at the land footprint of them, the amount of social housing that could have been provided if that land had been redeveloped is phenomenal. We could have had 2 to 3 times as many units on the same land. If those of you know some of them will know they're very spread out. They're single story in most cases, except for perhaps a couple. And they're certainly not modern, and with redevelopment we could have done a lot better on the same footprint. So I think that it was a retrograde step of the council to sell these properties, but that's no reflection at all on Accessible Properties, who do a good job.
Martin.
Thank you. I endorse all the very good original points Dave has made, and it was obvious and I acknowledge and respect the Mayor, who has given a statement around his vote at the time, and it's rare for a politician to say they were mistaken, and to great credit to Andrew that with respect, he's done that. I respect people will have different views around this table. That's democracy, obviously, but I think it was, I do have this incredible sense of wistfulness with what we now know and what an opportunity is lost. Trying to stay positive and constructive. Thank you for forwarding a very good report, and I think what's really important through Paula's committee, that we really, if you like, have a really good high-level look at all the social housing providers, and that should be reported into the Community and Services Committee, and also how we as planners, how we assist future housing providers. I was at a meeting yesterday with Councillor Henry and our staff, it's with Susan Wood at Maro Intermediate, where she had the representatives from the MP's offices, including Tim McIndoe, and the Housing New Zealand. And obviously one of the things that came out of there was some really poor communication, apparently, with a school. They're doing a redevelopment in the Churchill Road area. And I know that Dave and Bunty is going to go back and talk to school about some transport issues, some school buses. But it just really proved to me how we as a council need to be across all of those social housing developments. I would expect through Paula's committee for the Housing New Zealand to be regularly reporting to us directly, so that we've got an idea of where these new redevelopments are happening. And in the case of Mara Intermediate, which is a good example, they're not opposing, obviously, social housing, but they certainly are opposing the lack of communication with them. They certainly have significant worries around traffic issues and some social issues, and just want to be in the loop. But it really is important that we as a council, in terms of our social well-being, in terms of the legislation now, are right in the loop. So I'd really look forward to us having a very comprehensive interface with all of our major social housing providers. And I think also we need to reflect with regard to our permitting high density developments, to what degree do neighbours and schools and other stakeholders, are they informed, and to what degree are they involved at the process right at the very beginning?
Rob.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Look, I wasn't going to speak on this, but I really need to just balance up perhaps the reasons why the pensioner houses were sold during the last term, and just make sure that we've got a bit of a balanced view around the table. The decision to sell the pensioner houses during the last term came after exhaustive community consultation and was the best outcome based on the central government's decision then to incentivise only selected groups to provide social housing in our communities, of which council was not one of those groups who were so incentivised. The market's a little bit different now, as this government struggles to meet its own objectives around housing, and so there may now be an opportunity. I guess there's an opportunity for government to incentivise accessible housing to improve on the footprint that Councillor Dave referred to, but there's also an opportunity for central government now to extend the providers of social housing and perhaps to include the council, and it therefore falls back on central government to intervene and incentivise those additional groups to provide support to those people who are most vulnerable.
Thanks, Rob. Paula.
Chair, just want to add a little bit of support to the comments that Martin made before. I wasn't here when the previous decision around social housing was made, so I'm not going to weigh into that debate. But just to support the idea that we all need to have a thorough understanding of the entire housing needs of the city across all parts. And while we are pushing for more affordable housing, but are unlikely to achieve that in the very short term, it's really, really important that we understand the needs of our wider community, especially those with disabilities or low income or other accommodation disadvantage. We've heard this also from Zeal for Youth. So I'd like to understand that so that we are fully informed when we're going forward and trying to create housing solutions across the board. I think you do a fabulous job, but I suspect the need with the ageing community and other factors, the growing city, the need will only get more and more, and we need to understand where that's at and how we assist those that are working in social housing, which we're already part way down the track to doing. And information is key to this. Sound, absolute information is key to this.
Thank you. There's no more questions. I will move the receiving of the report. Do I have a seconder? Mallet Hamilton. Any debate? Pardon? I didn't hear what you said. Oh, did we? Oh, we've done it all. Oh, okay. Was that? Have we been through the debate? I thought we were doing. No, I thought that was questions we were doing then. Okay, we'll go straight to the vote. Those in favour, those against, are there any against? All right, that's passed unanimously, thank you. Okay, the next item on our agenda is the Local Government Funding Agency. They're not here. The people from Innovation Park are not here.
We could probably cover the LGFA off now, couldn't we?
Okay, we'll go through the LGFA now. Okay, this is item 7. Page 27.
So if I can just, with Mark's absence, maybe introduce the report. There's nothing different that is occurring in this report each year. Our CCOs require to get approval from council in terms of their statement of intent. In other words, what they are aiming for in terms of performance for the next financial year. What you've got in front of you is the half-year report, which shows strong operating results. In terms of an understanding of ownership around the LGFA, it's owned by many councils, and if you turn to page 64 of your agenda, you'll see the percentage ownership. The New Zealand Government owns 11.1% of the LGFA, so they have skin in the game. The core value with the LGFA is to give us access to debt borrowing that is at lower interest rates than we could get otherwise on the open market. It's also to give us confidence that we can access debt when we need it, and it's also to give us access to borrowings that can take out for a longer term than you would get on the open market. So very strong result. In terms of the statement of intent, there are nothing significantly new, but on page 69 of the agenda, there's a letter to shareholders that may be of interest or will be of interest. They are forecasting profitability to remain strong. They're expecting that net interest income will remain constant for the next 3 years. And they are noting in the third bullet point, having reviewed the 2018-28 long-term plans, that there is going to be a requirement from councils to access a lot more debt than they have in the past, certainly from growth councils, and we're quite aware of that in terms of our capital program of $2 billion over the next 10 years, with $250 million in the first year, when in a normal year in the past we had a capex program of $100 million. So a lot of activity going on. The LGFA are great friends of local government in terms of providing access to cheap funds and longer rates. And so the statement of intent is merely giving you visibility of their performance and what they plan to do for the next 12 months. So Mark would have done a lot of better job than I have, but that's just to give you some level of comfort in terms of what you've got in front of you.
Thanks, David. Okay, so in terms of questions, and I see there's a couple here, also you have the opportunity to send emails to Tracy, who will, so if anything comes to your mind later on or something, to Tracy, she can address them to, what's his name? Mark Butcher, yeah.
The other thing, sorry, Chair, I forgot to say that Mark is apologetic about not being able to make the meeting at short notice, but he has offered to come back and come to us, and if elected members would like, I'm happy to get Mark back into a briefing so he can actually talk to this, to give you just more background, and you may have some other questions that you might like to ask in that briefing.
Thank you.
Briefing.
Rob.
One question I was going to ask him, but perhaps it might be a question that could be referred back to him. In the statement of intent, there's no indication as to how LGFA might respond to councils who are seeking funding through SPVs or PPPs. And I just wondered whether, and I know that we're not the only council investigating alternative options for funding infrastructure projects. And I just wondered if perhaps we could respond back to him with a question as to, because while I believe some of those debts will be off our balance sheet, they have other impacts on LGFA's ability to respond to guarantees that we've undertaken, and PPPs, in my understanding, do have a balance sheet effect, although it's by way of note rather than necessarily impacting on numbers. So I just wonder if perhaps we should just quiz him with that, because it not only affects us, it may affect other borrowing councils too. And it may be something he may want to talk about if he comes back for a briefing.
Well, I think that would be a good idea, because it's a large topic, of course. LGFA are obviously aware of these off-balance sheet mechanisms, and one of the things that we talk about at the Shareholders' Council is about LGFA needing to stay relevant. Of course, there is BAU-related debt borrowing that will occur from local government to look after the assets that we have. The special purpose vehicles will be targeted in terms of bringing forward capital programs for councils that can't afford to bring it forward. So it will be hand in glove, I would suggest, but I think Mark should come back and give...
But we are a council that can both have access to borrowing, and that these SPVs or PPPs or any other funding mechanism that pops out of the woodwork may in fact be beneficial to us in addition to our continued borrowing with LGFA.
Correct. Now, we do have a briefing on this Thursday, so Blair is coming to do a briefing on special purpose vehicles. So there'll be a significant conversation that we have this Thursday around this topic.
And so Rob, probably direct an email, like CC everyone in if you want, but direct it to Tracy, and we'll get him, he can respond to your request.
Just a question back to David. Will we be able to discuss this on Thursday then?
I'm not sure whether Mark could make it on Thursday. The purpose of the briefing on Thursday.
So getting an email off to him today might be
helpful.
Might be helpful.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Councillor Robb, so your concern is that we try and understand your concern so that we can make sure we get the right answer back to address your concern.
My concern is if we head off and obtain funding through SPVs or PPPs or whatever, that we might find that LGFA thinks our risk has gone up and may want to charge us higher rates of interest on our borrowing as usual. They may put more scrutiny around our balance sheet in terms of potential risks that might exist to external organisations.
Yep.
As opposed to at the moment, pretty much most of our borrowing is with them, as I understand it. And so therefore we're in the tent pretty much solely with them and no one else.
Okay.
And it's part of a culture change for them too, because we won't be the only member councils who might be looking down this track. And that is why I thought it might be useful to have it in their statement of intent as to what their view is or how they will work with councils to successfully implement that kind of borrowing if it's appropriate to do so.
Yep, so I think Thursday's conversation is going to be quite relevant in terms of you'll get a better insight in terms of the structure of these special purpose vehicles and where the government's at with and Treasurer are at, which will enable you to better understand that risk profile. What I can also say...
But how they understand it too is important.
Well, what I
how
was about to add to that.
LGFA understands it too.
Yeah, so what has been very clear through this process is ensuring that this doesn't disadvantage councils from a number of perspectives, including credit rating perspective, and also doesn't disadvantage the government balance sheet either. And so there's been a lot of conversations with LGFA, but as well as the credit rating agencies are also involved in this conversation as well. So I suggest not only do we ask Mark those questions, I suggest that you engage when Blair brings the externals through on Thursday, the same questions as well, because it'll give you the balance on both sides of the mix. It may give you confidence and actually adapt your question for LGFA at the same time.
Yep, okay, thank you.
Thanks. Angela?
Thanks, David. I was the one that asked when they presented last time about what their capacity is going to be in the future because they were looking at all the councils, particularly high growth councils, their LTP and their capital programs. So I'm nervous about them saying that councils are going to have to increase their debt capacity. What's the reality then? I mean, to me that sounds like in the future the door could be closed to us. And Councillor Pascoe's just raised some issues. You know, they provide the majority of our funding. What's the capacity for them to look for more capital to increase their funding ability to councils?
So LGFA have the same credit rating as the New Zealand government, so they're seen as a quality borrower, access to funds. So they will be able to get access to funds either offshore or within New Zealand more easily than those agencies that don't have the strong credit rating that LGFA have. And they have a strong credit rating because of the nature of local government in terms of the security behind the debt. So they won't have a problem at all accessing funds to satisfy the needs of local government.
And do you think that's something that they will look at? Because obviously there's a significant financial risk not only for our CAPEX program if we can't find funding, but if we have to look outside of LGFA, then there's significant impact financially.
What they're signalling here is that they have already looked at it and they feel that they have signalled to the market that they'll be wanting to access further money, and then they've got that at hand, so they're not concerned about it.
Okay.
And just further to that, the advantage that the reason they maintain their really robust credit rating is the really strict processes they put in place in terms of who they lend money to. So the fact is that we have our credit rating enables us to have a certain type of debt to revenue ratio. If we had a lower credit rating, our ability to borrow would be less against our revenue. And so they maintain a risk profile through their work as well, which gives a little bit of comfort in terms of assessing that as well.
Yeah, but they wouldn't have given us the message that councils
well, they see what we've told them is coming. Yeah, that's the challenge. And to be fair, I've spoken to the chair of our GFA, and they're very much tied into the special purpose vehicle, what the government's trying to achieve. They also know that there is a big, huge capital wave coming down the track, and it's not just growth councils, it's the challenges, smaller councils that are trying to find funding for infrastructure for declining populations. So what's the next innovative solution for water when your population's half what it was when you played in the first one, and so forth as well. So one of the good things that David's alluded to is they're very good at data analytics around our capital programs. So they've got all our 10-year and our 30-year infrastructure programs identified and analysed, so they know where we're heading as well, which is reassuring, if not really scary.
Okay, so just to remind you, send those emails through to Tracy and she will forward them on to Mr Butcher. And by the sounds of it, we've got a briefing with later this week. Okay, all right, thank you very much. All right, are there any more questions? All right, I will move that, sorry.
In respect to that, it would be fair to say that housing is driving a lot of that need for debt.
Say that again?
Housing.
Oh,
Tackling
housing,
New
yeah.
Zealand's housing problem is a large part of what we're finding ourselves involved in. So are we having conversations with government about the drivers? I mean, there's infrastructure. There are a lot of councils who've got old infrastructure that need to roll out new infrastructure over a short period of time. So I know that that's a big driver.
Paula, you're a bit out of scope here.
No, I'm talking about
we're
what's
talking
driving
about a
the debt
funding
levels.
agency here. You're talking about a much wider.
I am. I'm talking about what's driving the levels of debt. That's the pressure on us. Does it?
I think each council has its own story. The LGFA are taking into account the capital profile, but they're not making decisions on how councils have decided to spend their money. It's really important to distinguish between the discussions we're having around special purpose vehicles. Those vehicles are not coming into play because the LGFA can't get access to cash. They can get access to as much cash as we need. The issue is the constraints on councils in terms of their debt to revenue and being able to...
It is, but then I was dropping down one level from saying
Yeah.
that and saying what drives the debt to revenue issue is how we're tackling new infrastructure and housing largely.
Different councils have different issues. Some councils have
But for
a
us,
smaller...
that's the big pressure.
Yep.
And so when we're having conversations with government, are we alerting them to that, the fact that it's both enabling and disabling to have to spend so much money on new housing and growth at this time?
Yeah, the answer to that question is yes. So there's other things you've got to be aware of. That the reason that there's a big wave of renewals that are sort of coming around about the same time, just given the nature of when New Zealand invested in its capital for all councils. So a lot of our water networks were funded originally by government investment back in the 50s, 60s and 70s and now coming home to roost in terms of their need to be replaced. So there's a big drive of renewals. The actual cost of capital, the cost of infrastructure investment's gone up significantly, so there's a big driver there. And growth is something that all councils are battling with in different ways, shapes or form, whether it's positive growth or negative growth, and there's costs attached to that, and the government's very aware of that as well.
And I think that was the point in raising it, and that's why I don't think it was irrelevant, because I think we've got to understand what's sitting behind this. Or we can't have the right conversations in government otherwise, can we?
Okay, I'll move that the report be received. Do I have a seconder? Mallet Hamilton. Any debate?
I was also not only receiving the report, but approving the statement of intent.
And approving the statement of intent?
Yep.
Do you mind that being added in? Right. Okay. Any debate? There is no debate. We'll just go by the ayes and nays. Those in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Is there anyone against? Okay, that was carried unanimously. Thank you. We don't have Barry Harris, Stu Gordon here. Blair's not here. Sean's not here. Okay, we'll go to item 11, which is page 175, Civic Finance Services. Again, this is a statement of intent in a report, an annual report. Okay, are there any questions on the report?
question, and that is, in the past when this report has been presented, we've often asked whether there's any market for our shares to be sold. And given the fact that they've moved from, I think, $150,000 surplus, no, $30,000 surplus in 17, before tax profit of $30,000 to $1.196 million in 2018, I just wondered whether the marketability of the shares had improved, and we had other shareholders lining up at the door wanting to buy our shares.
No.
Okay. That was a very quick answer. Okay, thank you.
Any more questions? All right, I'll move the report be received and the statement of intent be approved. Who was that, Rob, was it? Malik, Pascoe, any debate? Okay, those in favour, those against, is there any against? Okay, unanimous, thank you. Okay, we're now moving into item 12, page 217, so we're moving into our reports now, our internal reports. The capital report, page 217. Natalie and Chris.
Morena, councillors, Mangai Bella. So just a few points to make. So this is our progress to the end of February, with a few months left to go to the end of the financial year. So the year-to-date spend is, paragraph 5 of the executive summary is 78.5 million. So we're up 75 to 80% expenditure on what we achieved last year. So that's a demonstration that the organisation has ramped up to spend our bigger capital program. This report is indicating a forecast annual spend of $186.9 million, which includes $64 million of deferrals. So I just would like to make the point that of that $64 million of deferrals, almost 50 million of that relates to projects that are underway and will be finished within the next year or so. So they're what we call phasing deferrals, and not really
Chris,
delayed deferrals.
When you say year, you mean financial year, do you?
When
you say year, you mean financial year?
Financial, yes.
Yeah.
Yep. So we just the last point I'd make is that we're continuing to improve our attachments and our program summaries. So you'll see this time we've made a change to try and reflect some of the achievements on each of the programs. So just a lot more use of photographs of projects and things that we're actually achieving in each of the programs. So hopefully with your feedback we can continue to improve those reports, so they're a lot more useful for the community and understanding what's happening in those geographical areas. So look, I'm happy just to take any questions you have on the report now.
Chris, I've just got a couple. We've got 8, I think we call them programs.
Yep.
Is that right?
Yep.
Okay, but you only report on pages 28 to 218 to 219. You only report on 6 of them. So
yeah.
Citywide Waters and Rurakura are not mentioned.
Yep. Yeah. So
They're the ones that are going badly.
there are 8 programs. They're all fully reported on in the attachments and the program sheets in attachment 1. We've just chosen to put some highlights of 6 of those 8 programs there, because nothing has changed much since our last report on the Rurakura program or
just
water.
for sort of consistency and clarity, could you just
we could
even
that, yeah.
put nothing to report for each of them? Otherwise,
yep. No, we'll do that. What we're trying to report is really changed since the last report, but
yeah.
We can pick that up and do that just to make sure there's no confusion. Yep.
Okay, and then on your big fold out on page 225, on the top right-hand, there's a box that's headlined Portfolio Commentary / Highlights. If you've got that, can you see that? And you're starting with a figure of 254.8 million. And you have some adds and deletes, and you come down to 187.8 million. You haven't put brackets around the ones that are minuses? Yeah, so...
Yep, so their comments are passed on, and in accordance with our standard process, we'll change our report to reflect that.
Thank you. Mark?
Thanks, Gary. Chris, couple of quick questions. Page 218 of our report, the 64.2 million of deferrals, is that pretty? How does that compare with last year and the year before and the year before at this point in time?
So last year, remembering that our capital program was about 100 million and not 250 million, the deferrals were just around about 20 million, around that sort of figure. They hovered around 20 million. So I think we anticipate for the last couple of years about $25 million of deferrals when we're looking at our programming. So it is higher this year, but the capital program is a lot larger.
Yeah, so I guess what I'm wondering is, as a first-term councillor, are we over budgeting what we can do in very simple terms? Because it seems to be a common thing. We're deferring, raising expectations, and not being able to do the work simply because we haven't got the manpower.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah. I think what this report is trying to highlight, of those deferrals, of that 60 million, $50 million of those, which is the last proportion, relate to projects that are in good shape. You know, they're tendered, they're being constructed at the moment.
Yeah.
It's just when we put the program together at a point in time, we're trying to guess what the cash flow would be to meet the program.
Yeah.
We then go forward and do our work and our design, and we let contracts, we get a supplier on board, and their view of the program will be different than what we thought 2 years ago. So we're just adjusting the program to reflect the contract we've got in place.
Rightio.
So my point is, of the deferrals, the vast majority of them are for projects which are happening now and will finish in the next 1 or 2 years.
Right, okay. And that difference to the 3-year reporting we've gone to, as opposed to the single-year reporting, is that making it easier?
Yeah, we are trying to move to giving you a 3-year view on the programs for this very issue. So when you look at a year by year, you can see why you can come to the conclusion we're not delivering projects. But when you look at the 3-year program, it does tell a different story that we are delivering them.
Yeah.
But to be fair, there will always be projects that are deferrals for other reasons as well. So we are, if you look in the body of the report, we're highlighting those to you as well and the reasons why. So there's a lot more information in this suite of reporting than we've ever had before, I think, in terms of why projects are not being delivered. Look, part of the capital group is to get better at our programming and our forecasting. So look, the capital group's been in place for less than a year now, but would expect to see, I am seeing improvements that will be coming in the years to come in terms of our budgeting and forecasting when projects are going to happen.
Right, cool, thank you. And just a couple of quick specifics, if I may. Page 232 in the fold-out, I noticed the Hillcrest Stadium playground's budgeted for, but that's all there is budgeted for in that area. Is that, have we made that decision that it's going to go there, have we, or?
Sorry, can I just confirm?
232? Because I thought they were still up in the air.
Sorry, and your question was, are you looking at the green circle?
Yes, I am. The Hillcrest Stadium playground, the 380,000, or the 0.3 out of a million, which sounds even bigger.
The 380,000?
The decision hasn't been made yet. We just finished the public consultation. It was actually put in the budget. There was a budget line written in there prior to going through that whole renewal, the review of the playgrounds program and that sort of thing. So we can update that so it's a bit more generic until that decision's made.
Just thinking for public calm, it might be an idea. Yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
no, it's a good point. Thank you.
Thank you. Next page 233. I'm looking at the Wairere Drive extension, the $38 million one. That's now, I'm presuming that's the flyover, right? That's the one that Andrew swung that great deal on?
Yeah, so the the Wairiri Drive extension, $38 million, is the Cobham Wairiri interchange.
I thought there was 28 million. Was it, or does this include the road right up to Cambridge Road? as well?
No,
It's only another 10 million.
it includes the connection and a stub sort of pointing towards Peacock. So it's 38 million, but a large proportion of that is we're receiving an NZTA subsidy.
Yep.
So that is the correct budget for the project.
So that's a gross budget as opposed to...
That's the gross budget, and
cool.
and we've got a much higher proportion than 50% being paid for by New Zealand Transport Agency on that
Yeah,
project.
that was my next question. What, it was up to 70%, wasn't it? It was pretty big.
It's somewhere between 50 and 70. So
Yeah.
the basis of that contract was that NZTA as a state highway agency put some money in
Yep.
on a proportion of the project, and then we got 50% on the balance. So the FAR wasn't a standard enhanced FAR, it was a mixture for the specifics of that project, but it was a very good deal for council.
Yeah, it was, I remember. And finally, the Thomas Gordonton, that's the same deal. That's the gross amount as the 12 million, that's the gross amount, and that's for the entire corridor, isn't it? Not just
Yep, all of the costs we quote are gross costs, and for that one there, councillors recall, we won a 75.5% subsidy on that one.
Yeah, great work. Thank you, it's me. Thanks, Chris.
Ryan?
Thanks, Chair. Just an easy one for you guys. Great report. Just there was a mention in there somewhere about the Gordonton Road development was getting or the corridor was getting deferred slightly. Was that because of a developer issue, or what was the rationale with that?
So I'm not sure where that's written in the thing, but there was a meeting yesterday. What we're looking at is the whole corridor. So we've done one intersection in the corridor. But we had a study going to look at the whole corridor and how we might upgrade that corridor over time. So that's a work in process, and we just touched base with the Access Hamilton Task Force yesterday to get some direction from the task force before we bring that to council. It is tied up with some long-term planning in that area as well, and the area of land which we call R2. And the continuation of the spine road through Ruakura and what our strategy is over time. So we're right in the middle of that study, and that will come back to council very shortly. As I say, the team just got some direction from the Access Hamilton Task Force yesterday on that project.
Thanks. That's cool.
Rob?
Thanks, thanks, Chair, and thanks for the report, Chris. Just looking at paragraph 11 and also details of it being repeated in paragraph 77, page 218, and paragraph 77 as an emerging issue. Are you looking, is my reading of this suggesting that you're looking to, also, as we've got the capital program kind of spread over 3 years, you're looking now at the renewals and compliance program also being sort of spread over 3 years to try and get some evening of the spend, rather than trying to meet annual budgets of spends around renewals in the compliance program?
Yep. So it's not to get evening of spend. It's more to have agility. Like what we're tasked with is managing all of council's assets over all of our portfolios. And we've got money in different categories for each of the different types of activities. Sometimes it's really useful to slow some up and speed some up, and just the agility to do that on a day-to-day basis and between years. So what we do recognise is it's really important to council and to us that we look after all of our assets equally, and we don't take all of the money away from one asset to do other assets. So we do recognise that, and so we want to have an eye on that, but we do want some agility as staff to just move money between the different asset types and between years, and through the reporting give you the confidence that we are looking at all of the assets, and over the 3-year period, largely spending the money that was assigned to that asset type as well, but just with the different timing as things happen. For instance, when we might plan to put a roof on a building, But when we go to look into it, there might be another dependent project that we need to do first, and the roof needs to go next year. So that creates an opportunity, I guess, to bring another project forward. So we spend all of our allotted money, but spending it on planned and the right things, but just in a different order. So what we're looking to do is get a delegation so we can have that agility just in that program. All the other programs are still a project-by-project decision that council makes. But for that program, which is about looking after our assets and just minor works to keep the minor level of service changes, it's really inefficient for us not to be able to do that and have to come to council all the time. You know, at the moment, if we spend, you know, a few dollars outside the allocated money, we need some delegation to do that.
So do you think we're being too rigid by, do you think council is being too rigid by saying, here's a pot of $30 million to spend on renewals and maintaining our assets, and this is what you have to spend it on, rather than saying, here's $30 million, you decide within 1 year to spend the $30 million, but as managers you decide what takes priority and what makes sense to spend this year, and what might, given that we've got a 10-year program for this, and what would be best to leave, or what could be left in terms of your management processes, what could be left to a subsequent year. I just kind of think we kind of hem management in a bit, and don't give you that freedom to make that agility or nimble decision that needs to be made when a requirement arises.
Yeah, so to answer that, we are looking for the agility, but it's still really important that our spend is informed by our asset management planning, which is what councillors sign off. So you do sign off in a 10-year plan the money we need according to our asset management plan. So it's still really important to councillors and to us that we are spending in accordance with those asset management plan. All we're saying is we can do that, and we can do it a lot more efficiently if you just give us a little bit of agility to move around the edges a little bit, and not substantially. But we'll be reporting to you exactly what we do in that area.
And to add to that, you also, through the asset management plan and the 10-year plan, set your levels of service for our infrastructure. And so ultimately what we attempt to do, and which we do very successfully in most cases, is actually deliver a level of renewals that ensure that those assets are maintained in perpetuity to those service levels as well. And so we don't, and it's not it's actually a life cycle thing. You know, the greatest level of flexibility is to manage over 10 years, but that's not acceptable. We, you know, bring that back to a 3-year period, but like Chris says, around the fringes, gives us that ability to move things around, particularly also maintain our balance sheet criteria and our debt to revenue ratio when there's significant issues are identified as well.
So will this come to us as a briefing before the next finance meeting, or is it intended that at the next finance meeting you will bring a request to do exactly what you're suggesting in 11 and 70 and paragraph 77?
My thinking was to test it with the chair and deputy chair, and then see the need for a briefing or not.
Okay. Given the consultation during the long-term plan last year, would you have expected, and the fact that we felt, well, council felt, that we hadn't been maintaining our assets as well as we could have in the past, would you have expected a rush of spending in the first couple of years that would have consumed all of the allocated budget for renewals and maintenance of assets?
Yeah, and we are seeing that. So council did allocate more funding to renewals and looking after assets, and quite significant in some of the asset groups. And we are seeing a real ramp up and those asset management groups spending the money on the area. So if you look at the detail of this, there is a significant spend happening at the moment on all of our assets right across the board, particularly some areas which have been underfunded in the past.
Right, okay. Look, I'm just not seeing that, and if I look on page 244, which is in the next report, and perhaps I'll raise it then, but you know, we're $6.5 million dollars ahead in terms of balancing our books for the year to date, which doesn't suggest to me, unless there are other reasons for that, that we have actually spent a good amount or the appropriate amount that we thought we were going to spend on maintaining our assets. And perhaps, you can answer that now if you want, but I may well raise it when we get to that report.
Yeah, just to point out, there's two types of spend on our assets. So one is our capital renewal spend, which this report is all about.
Yep.
So this is capital and renewals. Clearly, there's maintenance of assets as well. Like the big increase was for the renewals, which I'm talking to. The next report is about our operational spend, which includes maintenance of assets.
Yeah, okay, all right. Let me see what other questions I had. Paragraph 41 on page 220, you talk about capital savings, and you've got that down in that table at 45. Is that net of capital overruns? Because we must get from time to time small overruns in capital expenditure, or is that just the effect of savings that we've achieved?
That would be net.
Net, okay.
Yep. So that's there's only been sort of minor overruns, so well within Richard's allegation, but it's net of those. Yeah, okay. Correct. I'm just looking for confirmation.
And in paragraph 47, where you've got how you're going to spread those deferrals over 3 years, are we quite confident that deferred spend, I think, which it adds to the 74 million, which is mentioned earlier on, and is that all going to be dealt with by 2021? So whatever's being deferred from the 18-19 year will in fact all be completed by 2021, and that anything we're carrying over at that particular point in time will be deferred capital expenditure from 1920 and so forth?
We're putting a real strong focus across the board at the moment for our teams to look across multiple years. So the encouragement is not putting it all in year 3 if we don't think we can spend it in year 3. So we're trying to get a realistic cash flow, and we'll be looking to see this as almost a rolling 3-year as we move into the next financial year. So a lot of our projects at the moment that we're doing now do finish in the 3-year period. There's only a few that move into the next 4-year period. But answer to your question, we have a focus on looking at a realistic cash flow across years without an artificial boundary at year 3.
Okay. And just on reflection, now that you've been in place, or your division has been in place for sort of 9 months now, are you confident that you've got good oversight over both our capital program and our what do we call it, renewals, maintenance and renewals program, and that the effect of the structure that we set up, or that management set up at the beginning of this long-term plan, is in fact falling into place and working well?
I guess my answer to that will be have to be, yeah, I'm really confident, and I am. So one thing that we have, like last year in the 10-year plan, we introduced a new system called PSODA, which was a database for looking at all of our capital projects. Natalie, who's leading that, is getting accolades up and down the country now that we've actually managed to develop a system that gives a line of sight to every single bit of capital spend. She's got agencies coming in to talk to her about how she did that. So we actually have a really good system now that we can cut and dice and give a report in any which way you want on every single bit of capital spend. So look, that's really driving some really good discipline behaviours in the program groups that we've set up. Yep, so I'm very confident that the organisation's on a good track. I'm particularly pleased as a new GM coming in to see some of the competency around the organisation in delivering capital projects. It's also good to be able to support them in areas where they need a little bit of help with Chris Barton's team. So there's a lot of really good stuff happening, and you can see, by 80% more spend than we did last year. There's a significant ramp up going on. You know, you're not tempting fate here, but we're not seeing reports come to council of, you know, significant cost overruns of projects that we've started and big cost overruns. So that's a focus for us to make sure that we just get better and better at our estimating and programming to keep on top of it. So look, I think councillors should be really confident at the moment that we are delivering our capital program very well.
Thank you. And one very last question, with your indulgence, Chair. Work in progress in paragraph 60, I'm pleased that you've got focus on that too, because I know that between you and Finance, hopefully we'll get the balances down. Are you confident that you've got oversight now on work in progress, which of course got out of control during the last council term in terms of the amount that hadn't been allocated to assets, that there is a good solid work program between you and Finance in terms of getting work in progress converted into an asset as far as our financial statements are concerned, and having depreciation claimed at the appropriate times, and that balance is not, as we head into an even greater value of our capital program, that it's not falling behind?
Yep, look, as you pointed out, it's a partnership between us and David's group to get that right. So one of the shifts that we made 2 years ago was to shift the focus to being an asset management responsibility with the corporate help. So we've got 2 sets of eyes looking at it. So we've got good systems in place to monitor it now and take actions to keep it going. It is challenging, I have to say, and we've just, although we're on top of it now, there was a few signs of a bit of slippage in some areas, but because we're monitoring it, we've seen that early and we've just taken some corrective action to get that right. So it is challenging, but the important thing to note for councillors too is that we have a very large capital program, so you are going to see an increase in work in progress, and there's nothing wrong with that. The green whip is good whip, it's genuine work in progress. The red whip, which is the outstanding whip, is the one that we've got to concentrate on, and that's been reducing. So we are getting better, and yes, we've got a good focus on it.
Yep, thank you.
David.
Much. Paragraph 50 on page 221, just a couple of questions relating to one of the items in that table, Rotatuna program. Firstly, I went to check, I wasn't aware where Northridge Road was exactly, and I went to check in my maps. And is this the same as Northridge Drive, or has it changed its name, or is I'm seriously trying to check which road it is?
So this is in the Horsham Downs annex on the other side of the Waikato Expressway. So
okay,
we've got that little annex that
just round the corner is another road with almost the same name. That's a bit odd, because we've got Northridge Drive. It's been there for a long time. Next one up from Moonlight, if you know the area. But so there's another one almost the same. That's why I was confused about which place it was.
Yeah, look, I'll double check that because our system shouldn't allow 2 names exactly the same. So
one's drive and one's road, and
so we could have that
about 200 to 300 metres away from each other.
Yeah,
but that's not.
Dave, I think we may have run out of iterations of Borman Road.
Sorry?
We may have run out of iterations of Borman Road.
Yeah, new, old,
yeah.
changed.
Stink.
Look, my real question was just in relation to your explanation there, how the funding has been brought forward from year 5 to 2, and it's opening up 100 lots ahead of what was initially predicted. Do we, through finance, the finance section, then have that's one side of the table where we're fast-tracking the capital expenditure? Are we also bringing forward the income from DCs for that 100 lots and the rates? I know there's swings and roundabouts when you add all the programs there. They're just treating this as an isolated line. How does that work when you bring something forward like that, or delay it, I suppose?
Yeah, sorry, some of my questions, I might have been confused. Some of my answers to your question might have been looking at the line above with the stormwater upsize. So your question, yeah, so when we bring funding forward, there are a lot of dependencies that we'd need to look at. So funding sources sometimes in NZTA revenue, DCs and consequential OPEX.
So you do have that line going at the same time is really what I'm checking about, yeah.
Yeah, and at the moment, we're working with David on the consequential OPEX. So every time we move a capital project, it could move our operating line, which we haven't had a great focus on, but we're just looking at that much more closely now.
That's right. And in Greg's team, as soon as we...
Sorry, David?
In Greg's team, so in the DC team, as soon as we change the capital program, we update that. And all those changes have been represented in the annual plan that will go through in 21st of May for year 2.
Right.
So, so that's all updated.
Yeah, thanks.
Angela.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for your report. Just a couple of quick questions. Page 219, the designs are progressing well for Zoo and the Waiwhakareke entranceway. So we've got 6 million locked into the budget for 2021. When will we start seeing those designs? When does it start coming to elected members? Lance?
In about 2 months' time. So they're in really the principal stage at the moment, and once we get to concept designs, then we'll bring those to a council briefing, so you'll be fully briefed on those as we work through that process.
Okay, great, thank you. Chris, on page 223, the key risks with NZTA, we've been talking about that for the last few weeks, and it's a significant risk to our CapEx program. Have you started work on identifying worst case scenario, what we can push back, push out, look for alternative funding, cancel? Have you started work on that, or are we just in a holding pattern to see what they're doing?
Yep, I'm sort of going to look to David to my right here, but we have recognised the need for some scenario modelling and looking at some scenarios and what that means. So that work is underway at the moment. I know my team's looking at it and talking to David's team. I just haven't caught up on that just lately where we're at with that. But we are definitely looking at the modelling of some scenarios.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct.
And can you give me an idea of the quantum of what is actually possibly at risk? Or is it too early?
It's probably a little bit early, but I think maybe the next capital report we can probably do a bit more detail on that.
Okay, all right. Thanks. Page 227, Rotatuna Program Capital Report. I'm looking at the top graph on the right. The report sort of...
Sorry, is that, Angela, is that the one that says Rotatuna Program Capital Expenditure?
Yep.
18-19, yep.
So the report, the context in the report, the commentary in the report is sort of saying it's on track, but there's, to budget this year is 25 million. We've only spent 7.3 million. So is it actually really all on track, or we just, what's going on there?
So there are a couple of bullet payments in there. For instance, we have a $5 million payment due in March for our Resolution Drive intersection to NZTA, who are building it for us. So there are some things like that which drive some of the figures.
Yep.
So we have looked really carefully at all of the projects in there with all of our project managers, and it's their view that we will be on track.
Okay.
I do have to say, I expect more deferrals will come onto the table as we head to the next year, but we are trying hard to get a really accurate picture every month, whereas previous years we've really just had a really hard look in the last couple of months, but every month we're trying to drive that discipline of looking hard at what we're going to spend by the end of the year.
Yeah, okay, great. Thank you for clearing that up. Page 228. Now this is Rotokauri. Just deferrals there have been signalled for this program, and the commentary talks about delayed deferrals due to the need to align with developer timing. Is there any consequence here with our new DC policy? I mean, is that actually the developer's timing issue here?
Look, I don't
something else?
think so. So what that comment refers to is some infrastructure planning works. So it's for the designation of the major swale, and it's for designation of the north-south transport arterials. So we've programmed to do that, and for the swales we've done all of the work, and we're at a point of time where we could lodge our designation.
Okay.
For transport we haven't started it. The reason we're holding back is because of some current discussions with major developers in that area, probably working with Blair's team and some potential funding opportunities in that area as well, and just asking ourselves, is that the right thing for us to do at this point in time to progress the designations? For instance, one of the major developers has a slightly different view that we could save money on the stormwater swale by doing something else, so we don't want to go and designate for it if that good idea comes to fruition. So we're deliberately holding back just over the next months to get a bit more alignment with the developers in that area of how we progress that and what's the best strategy. And it could very well be that the agreed best strategy is for us to proceed with our designations, which give us sort of planning right, I guess, to put that infrastructure in. But just at this point in time, I think it's opportune just to hold back until we got the strategy right.
So the answer to my question, Chris, was no. But I really appreciate the detail. Thank you.
Mark?
Thank you. I just want to sneak one question in. Chris, page 229, R2. What's the timeline on R2 becoming R2D2 or ours?
I might just transfer that question to Blair, who's in the audience. He's probably more in a better place to answer that one.
Thanks, Chris and Councillor Bunting. R2 currently is the subject of a strategic agreement with Waikato District Council, which says that it won't come to sea prior to 2039. As you know, with the corridor plan and the metro spatial plan and the construction of Waikato Expressway, we are in active conversations with Waikato District Council around that particular area and the developers. My expectation would be that the time frame would be sometime in the early 2020s period, probably 2022, 2023, but we are just working it through at the present time. And that is also part of, as Chris said, some of the funding and financing conversations we're having with the government as well. And we'll talk about that more on Thursday at the briefing.
Okay. All right. Well, in anticipation of that, I'm just trying to think, because the work we're doing in the Gordonton Road corridor, sort of with transport, obviously what they do in that area in the meantime changes a lot, doesn't it? So have we got some sort of tacit agreement that they're not going to put factories or anything big in there?
Yeah, certainly the thinking that we're doing and the work that Chris's team's doing and Jen's team, we're all making sure we're staying aligned and visible so that we understand what the future potential of that R2 area could be and what our infrastructure planning would need to be in the meantime.
Okay, cool. So it could be in the next sort of 5-10 years? Right. Thank you. Thanks, Chris.
Siggy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for that report. It was actually really interesting. Look, I'm glad you gave Councillor Leary a longer answer, which got me to thinking about, when the developers do come along with some of the ideas about stormwater and so on, has it happened? I assume it has happened previously, and do we take a lot of the ideas on board, or are they just there to save money, or are they some of these ideas really good? What comes along? Can you just explain a little bit more?
Look, I think we're continually working with developers on how to provide infrastructure and what the infrastructure looks like. I guess the conflict with stormwater is between saving money and doing the right thing for the river. So the bar is raising really high in terms of looking after the river, and healthy rivers change, and the move to wetlands and devices to get rid of phosphorus and nitrogen. So it's all really costly, and the healthy tension, I guess, is with our development community looking for cost-effective ways rather than cheap, I guess, to meet all of the requirements. So we're continually doing that. In this case here, the developer's got quite a novel idea, which we want to explore with them and just see. It could be that it saves money, but in terms of our operating costs, it doesn't. So in terms of a whole-of-life costs, we need to be careful as council because we've got to look after these assets for many, many years, and we don't want to accept a low capital cost but then have a very high whole-of-life cost. So look, it's a really healthy tension that we look to engage with developers on.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just have one, Chris. On page 220, paragraph 42, you talk about the organisation has increased focus on the capital portfolio and putting in place disciplines to allow for the realisation of savings. Can you give us some examples of those?
I might hand over to Natalie on my left here because Natalie is our PMO manager. She sits on all of the programs and trying to just drive that self-discipline within all of the programs to have the people on the programs asking some of those questions. So if I
guess my point is that it's easy to write something like that, sort of in an abstract thing, but then it's interesting for members to understand exactly what the tins and tacks of those things are.
So I think the biggest thing is making sure that we have a discipline around the defined scope, making sure that there's no scope creep, and also the challenging of that scope. Are we delivering the right things to get the right outcomes, as opposed to, oh, we've got this amount of money, so therefore we'll spend it to achieve better outcomes, but it's about achieving the right things.
Yep, and that was as abstract as what that says.
Well, yeah,
so when's it worked?
Well, it worked. It has worked in a couple of projects. Mm-hmm. So I guess the Western Interceptor duplication has been one where we've identified those savings, where the team has gone through and looked at all of the options, and then they've gone, what is it, the outcomes that we actually need to achieve? So they've actually, rather than going for the biggest, best outcome, they've gone with what we need to achieve.
So the whole rationale behind this portfolio process was to get these types of efficiencies, and the right hand is talking to the left hand and things like that.
So there's a lot of well, let's stop that project to make sure this project can go. Let's stop that project to wait for that information to come. And making the right decisions. It's a moving beast all the time, but it's a challenging that it's actually creating that healthy tension.
So if I can give an example that illustrates, and I'm not saying this is real, but it's the one that I've used to describe the behaviour I want.
Gives me even greater confidence.
Yep. So if we program in our asset management plans to replace 4 pumps, and we go out to tender and we get a really, really good price, that means that we can do 10 pumps. Why would we do 10 pumps when we had only programmed to do 4? Why don't we just build the 4 and bank the savings rather than just doing 10 because we've got the funding? So we're trying to put that discipline into it in terms of scope management to achieve the programs we set out to do, but don't be tempted to just go and spend the extra money if it's there, because look, Richard's given me a challenge to find savings, and that's one of the ways you get it, is just scope management and making sure if you are going to build 10 pumps, there's a really, really good reason to build 10 pumps and not just because we've got the money. So that's demonstrative of the type of discipline and behaviour we're trying to drive into that program.
Okay, might be worthwhile me coming in and having a talk to you. Right. Okay, thank you. Are there any more questions? There are no more questions. All right, I'll move that the report be, we're doing is receiving, that the report be received. Do I have a seconder? Mallet Casson. Is there any debate? Oh, sorry, Angela.
Look, I just want to say a few words to the staff, actually. Given the size of our capital program this year, I think you're doing extremely well to have already underway nearly 80% of that program. I think that it's evidence that the new portfolio approach to our capital program is working really well and delivering results. So Chris and Natalie, to you and your teams, congratulations and thank you. Okay, there's no more debate. I'll
just go to the ayes and nays. Those in favour, please say aye. Those against. Is there any against? Okay, passed unanimously. Thank you. And okay, we're now moving on to item 8. Barry and Stewart and Blair. And thank you very much for your patience. Okay, we're on item 8, which is Waikato Innovation Growth Limited, page 84. Welcome, Stuart and Barry.
Thank you, Chairman, councillors. Pleasure to be here. I'm Barry Harris, I'm Chair of Food Waikato. Stuart Gordon, our Chief Executive, is here to answer all the tough questions. We're here to present to you our statement of intent and our 6-month progress report for Food Waikato. A couple of quick observations from me before I hand over to Stuart, if that's okay, Chair. The organisation continues to perform well. We've had some revenue issues in the last period of time, which is part of the nature of the business we're in terms of the ability to switch on and switch off a product through the plant. But the board remains very confident around the performance. Obviously, a big issue for us at the moment is the development of Melody Dairies, the $50 million expansion, the capital works associated with that. That's taking a lot of board and management time, but overall remain very positive around the progress and your 70% investment in Food Waikato. Can I hand over to Stuart to just make a couple of comments, and then we're happy to take questions, Chair.
Mr Chairman, councillors, as Barry has said, we have just commenced, literally a month ago, the Melody Dairies dryer under our management, so the build has started, and at this stage we're on track to have that open in approximately February next year, available for commercial production and on budget. So the money has been received from the investors, and all the agreements are all in place, so it's looking exceptionally good. The other big thing that will be happening over the next year is starting to build up the sheep milk industry. I've just come from a sheep milk conference that shows the growth that's going to happen in that industry. That conference is held for the first time in the Waikato, because that's where it's actually been based now, with the amount of farms that actually the major farms are all based in the Waikato, and we'll see a big growth happen over the next 2 to 3 years in sheep milk production. As Barry has said, we're on target, and as the statement of intent shows, we're achieving profits, pretty stable business at the moment going forward. Our challenge will be in a couple of years' time, as we've grown these businesses and they move on to bigger and greater things.
Thanks, Stuart. I've just got a couple, and you kind of alluded to them there on our agenda, so page 84, you talked about a Blue River, the result as at the 31st December 2018 was a deficit of 161k, and it was due to a late payment from a client. Did you think why you wouldn't take that in? You wouldn't.
I think the words in there, it's not actually, it's the cash deficit. That's the, the profit was in line.
Yeah.
So we'd sold something,
yeah.
But we hadn't received the cash. It was still sitting in receivables, as against we programmed to receive it before that.
Yeah.
And so, so it's really, we had an increase in working capital, so therefore we had a cash deficit. We subsequently have received all that money in, and have on budget a cash surplus.
So at no stage were you concerned that the money was not going to come in?
No, because what we do in our contracts, we have a bond. We put up bonds. We require our customers to put up bonds. So that was just about equal to the amount outstanding. So we have deliberately been quite conservative in our sales, requiring that sort of cash up front effectively.
Okay.
Can you expand on the comment that says the plant is running at near, have you got this in front of you?
I think it's in the,
Okay, the plant is running at near full capacity after a loss. Sorry, members, this is on page 84 and it's paragraph 5. The plant is running at near full capacity after a loss of time due to Blue River Dairy, the plant's largest client, moving elsewhere. The void was filled by companies such as KOD, Little Oak and White Goat. Sounds like a...
well, this is the
something on
business we're in, is actually growing companies. And Blue River Dairy won the prize for the fastest growing export company in New Zealand. And we helped them achieve that. They subsequently, their sales were at such a level that they were able to move to a major big factory. We've had that happen, Dairy Goat, New Image, and one other just hit my mind. That's what we do. We grow them to a certain scale that allows them to invest into greater facilities.
So your business model is basically to allow smallest businesses to avoid the big capital spend of building their own dryer, and then using your thing, and then over time they get big enough to build their own. So this is just the natural thing that will happen.
We're about giving them scale while they're spending money on working capital, marketing, getting supply together is usually a problem. And once they've solved all those, and the classic would be New Image, we then gave them 2 years' notice that you are now of scale to go out and build your own factory.
So you asked your customers to go away.
Yeah.
Well, we
I
just...
think I've said before here, it's like, you know, when they get to be teenagers, it's time to leave home. But it does create some issues around timing sometimes. You know, they've been a significant player and then they move. But the level of demand and behind, you know, when the teenagers do leave, the level of demand for our dryer remains really, really strong.
Remains strong. Okay. On our agenda it's page 99, but on your statement of intent it's page 13, I think. Your overheads, and it might just be because the way you classify things, but your overheads are huge. Is that you, Barry?
It's not working.
No, well, when you actually look at what we're trying to run, I think the key thing is, you know, is our prices competitive in the market compared to what other alternatives? One, there's very limited alternatives.
Maybe you can make it easier, but by just explaining what makes up, for example, forecast for year 2020, there's $2.8 million in overheads. And then you've got depreciation and interest, which aren't included in those. Right. So what would be the things that make up the 2.8 million?
The main thing would be for us would be power, energy, which is
they're not overheads then.
Well, we've put them down there versus direct expenditure, which is more around labour. Our staffing, our management staff, those sorts of items.
Okay, but you wouldn't normally put power as an overhead. That's the power to fuel your dryer and things like that.
Yeah, I'm now trying to recall what's actually in that. I've got a breakdown here. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, okay. It just looks like the next year overheads is actually $600,000 greater than direct expenses. That's a lot of Christmas parties.
The direct there's a slight change in our sales mix between one year and the next year. This year the 20 year, where we have selling a lot of infant formula, where we've brought in the ingredients, and the ingredients are part of those direct expenses. Okay. So that's the only difference.
Okay. Chair, maybe it's just a definition thing, but it just looks bizarre to me.
Can we break that down and we'll provide it to Blair?
Thank you.
Not able to define it at the moment.
Thank you very much. Okay. Ziggy.
For your report. Just on page 84, number 6, you know, you're saying that the plant is fully booked up until June 2020, which is fantastic. And the trend is increased goat and sheep milk, fresh milk. And it continues. So, I mean, it's been growing. So what's the reason for that? And where the exports, where would you mainly export to?
We're not actually the exporter, of course, we're the manufacturer, but we work closely with their customers.
Yeah.
we're starting here with what is in an infancy, the sheep milk industry, which is now at present really made up of only two major players around that industry. And the idea is to grow that industry. I mean, the vision of this industry is to be somewhere in the $200 million worth of sales within the next 5 years. So these present players are looking at other suppliers to come on board, when I mean suppliers, farmers to come on board, to supply to them to meet the demand that's looked like there is for sheep milk, especially sheep milk infant formulas.
Okay.
It has some real benefits without getting too technical in the respect of digestibility versus cow's milk and taste. And it really seems to appeal to the Asian market in quite a few of the Asian countries.
So is that on par with goat's milk or different?
They're very much the same, goat and sheep. The only thing some would claim that sheep milk tastes better, but that's in the eyes of the beholder.
Okay, thank you so much.
And if I could just add to that, Councillor, I think there's some really interesting potential here around environmental impacts too, as a former dairy guy. But you know, the opportunity to better use land and have a lower environmental footprint through sheep milk is huge. So watch this space.
Thanks. Thank you for your report. Stuart, you said that you indicated there'll be a challenge in a few years' time as your clients move on, and at the moment you're stretched for the smaller to medium-sized businesses, I guess, that come and do a one-day trial. So the second spray dryer is not built yet, is it?
The second spray dryer doesn't start to February 20.
Next year, yeah. So what are you forecasting for that second spray dryer? Will that help alleviate new businesses coming and trying a product, or do you think the capacity is already going to be there with?
That was the whole reason of building it.
Well, it was, yeah.
We just can't meet the needs.
Yeah.
In particular, around the value added, there is so much. In fact, we're going to be in trouble trying to fit everything in this year.
Yeah.
There's so much capacity or demand to come on board. Remembering that our spray dryer is only half a tonne an hour and the new one only 1.2. If you compare, say, if you compare Sinlay or your Sheely up at Pocono, you look at those infant formulas, they're 8 tonne an hour. So it's quite a different matrix when you're talking about processing for an animal that only produces 3 litres a day versus a cow that might produces 20 litre, and that's why they need our sorts of plants.
And you can do more than dairy products, correct?
We do.
Yes.
We do a highly specialised ingredient that goes into infant formula, as well as we do one-off trials. But
have you identified, is there any emerging industry in New Zealand for, say, drying health products or sports products, or is that stuff still predominantly done overseas? And is it something that you could do?
Our big leap forward at the moment is concentrating on infant formulas, specialised infant formulas and adult formulas, I should say, which are really infant formulas just done in a different way.
Adult formula?
Well, there's really interest in aged care formulas. So where you have edited minerals or vitamins for aged care, which really is an infant formula but targeted at a different group. There's real interest around those. We are not really set up for the sports drinks, but we do produce some products that could go into sports drinks.
Okay.
But you know, I think what it's really just demonstrating that this is just an exciting growing industry.
Yeah, yeah. But basically the message from the report is, and as you've just said, Stuart, is that can't wait to get the second dryer up and running. It's going to be running at full capacity very, very quickly, which is a good.
Yeah, our estimates at this stage is within the year it will be at full.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thanks.
Councillor Leary, can I just sort of add a bit of context as well? So the spray dryer, and obviously Callaghan, which is a government entity, is the other 30% shareholder. Its whole purpose was to really help grow and commercialise businesses. The other thing that's probably not evident in the report here is the multiplier effect or the economic impact of what what this facility is doing to the economy of Hamilton and I guess the surrounding areas. But I mean, Stuart and Barry are a better place to talk about that. But the number of specialised businesses that are establishing and doing work here off the back of the spray dryer is quite substantial. So that, I think, is the real prize here, that whilst from a council perspective we don't see a dividend necessarily, we see a profitable business and it's growing, it's that a wider effect on our economy and the jobs, which is quite substantial. So,
Which was always the purpose in the outcome anyway.
Bella?
Thank you, Chair. Kia ora koutou. Two questions. Just a technical question on IFRS 11. I know you're going to answer this one, Barry. 70/30, we own D2. Why is it treated as a joint venture when we also appoint most of the board members?
Sorry, just the question again, so you're saying.
So the D2 is treated as a joint venture in accordance with your accounting?
So we have a company in between Food Waikato, which is effectively a shell company called D2 Limited, to own the shares in a joint venture called Melody Dairies.
Okay.
So it's 100% owned by Food Waikato to own these shares, and there's legal reasons around that structure. So that's why we appoint all the directors of D2, but it's just a shell company for owning shares, our 10%
And that's
ownership of Melody
10%.
Dairies.
Okay, all right. And the second question is, and it's probably a question for ourselves, is there a program to encourage more diversity on the boards of our CCOs? Just noting, I know you've got a school-based board, but is there an incentive to increase diversity?
I think we generally pick the best person for the job.
That's not the question, though. The
Pardon?
question is there a program to improve and encourage more diversity on the boards of our CCOs? I mean, Auckland has board observers, etc. Yeah.
Pardon?
Yes.
We do have a
We do have a policy,
CC
but it doesn't
appointment
specifically
policy.
cover diversity in that policy.
Yeah. Thank you. I'd just like to just pose the question for consideration going forward. Thank you.
Ryan?
Just a question for you guys. I understand, A2's the new hype, and goat milk, as I understand by default, is predominantly A2.
It's all A2.
And so is the sheep milk.
Sheep's the same.
Do you think that's also helping driving a lot of this growth?
Yeah, obviously it's a real marketing benefit, and that is used in the marketing. We're not marketers ourselves, but I see our customers using that. But it's particularly around the this lactose intolerance digestibility question is really probably the biggest benefits. Now, a lot of work, there's a big program at Massey with Auckland University actually trying to work this through so claims, so these things are being used more as antidotal marketing claims rather than health claims at this stage.
Thank you.
Paula?
Good morning. Just to follow on from that question, really, how do you keep in front of innovations? Because food drying was an innovation that you jumped on, and it was the right innovation to jump on because it's been very successful. Nutraceuticals, as you've said, is a huge growing market. But eventually you're going to have to look into new innovations, right? And kickstart something completely new. Just let me know, how do you keep abreast of upcoming innovations that you should be fronting?
Yeah, two things. We conduct, we are very close to our customers in respect of, and they're at the front market, talking with them where they see the opportunity and the result of that, where we should be investing to allow that manufacturer have. And we run a big network, so we are part of New Zealand's Food Innovation Network, and we were constantly working through people like Massey's Food Pilot, what's been trialled, what's been used, what's the latest. And there's certainly a big move more towards, I'd call, fresh products, in market, a lot more difficult to achieve, and we're trying to work through how we place ourselves in those markets. I mean, fresh infant formulas as against powder and those sorts of things, and the adult formulas, organic, the still a big trend. All those things we're monitoring through our Food Innovation Network and sitting down with our customers.
And Councillor, if I could just add to that, the Callaghan Institute has, for some time, has been reviewing its approach to this and how it makes investment in creating new innovation in the food and beverage area. So when that eventually is concluded, I think they'll give some guidance. Although we're part of the network, we're the only one that's actually not requiring ongoing funding from Callaghan to do what they do. I think makes a big difference.
So the part of the answer is you're working so closely with Callaghan.
Yep.
And in the long distance future, do you think that the business may move from food to another source of innovation? Or do you think the market is in food for a very long time?
Well, Barry and me are probably aligned together. There is this thing about new foods, which is really around plant-based foods, that trend. And that is a trend that's happening. But in reality, our competitive advantage as New Zealand is around these innovative products around, sheep, goat, cow, selling it to the middle class and wealthy of the world. That's our competitive advantage, and that's how we'll retain our incomes. So that's where we're focused. Barry, you'd like to?
I mean, we'll always be open to future, strategic opportunities to come along, but really our purpose is quite clear, and really the investment we've got and the kit that we've got there pretty much focuses on a certain type of product coming through. So, and look, just a general comment, it's a frustration that Stuart and I have spoken about before as members of the Food Innovation Network. There is this fascination with doing things differently and new, whereas there's huge potential to create improvements on the back of pastoral agricultural products, which kind of get bagged as commodities, but actually there's a lot of really, including what we do, a lot of really clever stuff that adds value, and I think the payback for New Zealand Inc. is going to be much greater doing that than chasing some of these bright ideas that may or may not work overseas.
Okay, so that's your focus for sustainability, is the value add and doing things smarter.
Yep.
So, okay, thank you.
Leo.
Here, I think you said there's a lot of sheep milk coming up from Southland. Is that still happening, or has Waikato started moving from dairying to sheep?
I think that's, we talk about Blue River Dairy, they are the people that we grew that are actually from Southland, and now their product is actually, as I understand it, going
processed in
Pocono,
Southland,
which is actually still in the Waikato. So they're growing the business to such a stage that they're having to use the big dryer up there.
Okay.
So that milk is still coming up to the Waikato.
Still.
And yeah, and the other thing is, that's where it's both our major suppliers are wanting that growth to happen in the Waikato. They've based their head offices in the Waikato. They're basing their canning and blending plants, etc. in the Waikato. So they're looking for growth in the greater Waikato area for the farming community from sheep milk.
So we'll probably see a lot of conversions then from dairying to goat or sheep in the future. I noticed on Country Calendar on Sunday night there's a big goat farm down Tigawiti Way where they moved into goat farming.
Correct, and you would have seen, the dairy goat crop is doing a fantastic job, and we support them, and their growth. That's now, I think, a $200 million business, and it's based here in Hamilton.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I will move the report be received and that we approve the statement of intent, the draft statement of intent, beg your pardon. Mallet Casson, is there any debate? Okay, we'll go straight to the vote. Those in favour, please say aye. Those against, is there any against? Okay, passed unanimously, thank you. We have our next group here. I am aware that members haven't had a break for nearly 2 hours. Is everyone feeling all right to keep going for the next one immediately?
All right, we'll move on to the next one, thank you, which is item 9, Waikato Local Authority Shared Services, page 101 in the agenda. Thanks, Barry, thanks, Stuart. Where's Stuart, has he gone already?
Don't mention it.
Everyone was feeling the same. Thank you, Gary.
Dear old Siri. I bloody had her turned off. She even works even though when you got the volume off. I got my volume off. Okay.
Just wondering, Mr Chair, if there's a fine for that?
Not as yet. Okay. Thanks, Kevin.
Okay.
Kevin?
Thank you, Mr Chair. So we're here to talk about Waikato LAS and where Waikato LAS is going. So there's probably two key things. The first thing is there's our 6-monthly report, which is really showing that we are pretty much on track. While the figures are showing that we're significantly ahead of budget, that's really timing differences, particularly around things like our work being done in the building cluster, and also around things like rata as well. The second piece, Mr Chair, is the more strategic piece, which is what's happening with the company itself. And our statement of intent is very much geared around changing things up in terms of what Waikato LAS is going to deliver. And that means that we have to change our resourcing and invest more heavily in order to be able to demonstrate the benefits that the company can deliver. This has all been informed by a report that we had done by McCready Winder in 2017. We signalled last year that this was our intent to look and investigate this, and we've now started to put that work in place with the recruitment of a full-time chief executive, which is Calvin French sitting next to me, and also changes around the board table as well. So we're moving to the appointment of an independent chair and reducing the overall size of the board from 12 directors to 6, including the independent chair. So, Mr Chair, that's really a summary of what's in. I know it's quite a detailed report, but essentially that's a summary of what's in the report. So.
Great, thank you very much. I've just got one...
Through the Chair, this was obviously what we conducted a briefing with Council just over a week ago, where we talked through the substantive matters in the report today.
Okay, just on the staff recommendation, and probably it's paragraph 4 on page 101, D, Romans 2 and Romans 4, both talk about the independent chair. One says a fee of up to $45,000, and then it says that to delegate authority to the 5 council representative directors to agree a fee. So do those two recommendations kind of contradict each other?
So, Mr Chair, I asked the same question. So the point of that is to say...
a lot more comfortable.
Yeah, the point of that is to say the ceiling is 45.
Yeah.
We would consider, based on the level of experience and skills of the person that is appointed, as to whether you pay 45 or somewhere below that figure.
Oh, okay.
Right.
All right, thank you. Angela.
Okay, so page 110, can you just remind me, with Future Proof, is LAS taking over the management of Future Proof? I know it's going through or has gone through a review, or is it just some projects out of Future Proof?
No, LAS is responsible for Future Proof, yes.
You are, okay.
It's one of the services delivered under the LAS umbrella.
Okay.
Just to
Leah,
clarify,
help me out.
Angela,
Yeah.
Councillor Leary, Future Proof obviously has its own joint committee and its own governance structure. So LAS provides the financial home for Future Proof in terms of its finances and its formal reporting, but Future Proof as a joint committee is its own entity.
Yeah, okay.
Just to clarify.
So, so the basic outcome outcome of the restructure is doing what we've done before, but also now delivering. That's pretty much it in a nutshell, isn't it? We haven't delivered, LAS hasn't delivered before. LAS has looked for efficiencies with shared services and projects, and there's a whole list of them that you've been working on and are working on. But now you're going to also, under the new structure, going to be delivering those. So that means you're going to be contracting. So many councils, partner councils decide they want to go ahead with this project.
Yep.
You will then take the lead of, am I reading that right?
Yes.
Of going out to tender and then managing that project for those councils? Is that what you mean by delivery?
Do you want to answer that?
Yes, so that's one aspect of it, Councillor. I guess the other aspect is that we would, LAS management will be developing business cases for new ideas and new ways of working that will impact on the shareholding councils. And those business cases, once approved by the LAS board, and those cases will be developed in consultation with council staff, so similar to the working groups that the LAS already operates through at the moment. But it may well be that under those business cases, the most appropriate structure would be for LAS to employ staff and deliver a shared service to those councils, as opposed to what has happened in the past, which is if a project has identified an opportunity, invariably a council has employed those people on behalf of the LAS, and Rata is a very good example of that.
Yes, okay, all right. And then I'm just looking at your, nowhere general, but looking at your statement of intent and the reconstituted organisation. There's a CEO forum, and so I guess my question is, future work streams or future projects that LAS looks at, where does that come from? Does that come from the CEO forum that sits on top of that? Or is that something that LAS will do separately? Like, where are you going to get your, where do you get your projects from? Where do you get your ideas? I mean, you talk about thought leadership, not that I'm a fan of buzz management words, but where is the work going to generate from? The CEO forum or something else?
Yeah, look, it could come from anywhere, quite frankly, and we're not wedded, and we don't want to isolate ourselves or limit where those good ideas might come from, because certainly I have no monopoly on those, and I don't think anyone does. So, look, we continue, at the moment we have various working parties that comprise subject matter experts with the council staff, and we will continue with those. So ideas come from those, and in fact we are having brainstorming sessions with those working groups at the moment and thinking, well, blue sky, what could things look like in the future in your particular area?
Yeah.
But I mean, I want to look at and explore other ways in which we can capture those ideas, because again, those ideas won't be limited to those working parties. It could come from any council staff. So where are the pain points within councils that LAS could be part of the solution to? And we need to find, presumably, some technological mechanism in which we can capture those ideas and filter through them.
I think so. What I'm hearing and where my concern was possibly sitting was that it's not going to, with a new structure, you're not going to sit around and just randomly think of ideas which create more work for councils. You're still top down. You're connected to the CEOs of those councils. You're connected to solving the problems of the partner councils' long-term strategic objectives.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So.
Right.
And indeed, we've developed a what we refer to as an opportunity assessment document, and that directly plugs into not only what LAS's strategic objectives are, but what the themes are that run through the shareholding councils and what they're trying to achieve, so that we don't run ourselves down rabbit holes. We are still a small team, and we need to be very focused on where we can get big bang for buck.
Yeah,
So.
great. And just a process question to you, Blair, you're our appointed director. Do we have to go through a new process now to reappoint you?
No, No, you don't, Councillor Leary, although in the resolution, I am just asking this council to I guess, reconfirm me as the director under the new structure.
Yeah.
It wasn't necessary, but I thought it best to put in there just so council has a chance to be aware that I am the director and would continue to be the director.
Yeah.
Noting, of course, the company has a rotation policy, so in 12 months' time, I'll be the first director because of my surname, comes up for rotation, and so council has the opportunity to reappoint me for a further term or to choose someone else.
So that was my second question, because we are accepting some changes to the constitution. So does that start now from? Does the new term start from day one?
The new term starts from the day that the chief executive, under the delegation, signs the constitution. It takes effect once all councils.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you.
Jeff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Look, thank you for this. I'm supportive of the proactive role that you're signalling, that you're going to take the more proactive role, and in terms of thought leadership, as you call it, and new service delivery models. And just noting on page 123 in the executive summary, where you say some of these ideas could be bold and disruptive. I'm just wondering how easy it will be to bring all councils on side with that. It's never easy, as we know, particularly maybe with smaller councils where staffing is threatened or sometimes a sense of identity. How do you propose to get to that last step in terms of being persuasive? You come up with the work, you get buy-in for business cases, but then you've still got to get to that last step of getting everybody over the line. How do you propose to persuade everybody?
I guess that's the challenge that we would always face. However, what we do have is very strong commitment from all the council chief executives. To the best of my knowledge, we have strong commitment from all the shareholders to date in terms of supporting the direction the company's going in. So at the end of the day, I see it probably a bit as Councillor O'Leary outlined, which is the strategic direction from the individual councils, and Waikato LAS is in alignment with that. That's our driver and our focus in terms of getting that commitment from lower down within individual councils. Hopefully, I've explained that. I guess the ultimate thing that we have is the ability to work very closely and influence the chief executives on the councils, that would be exactly what Waikato LAS would be doing.
Yeah.
Can I add to that one of the attributes that we'll be looking for in the independent chair is a very well-connected individual and a key influencer, and someone that is able to champion and influence at a different level from, part of my role obviously is to influence management within the councils, and we just have to attack this at a number of different layers, because the reality is it will be a challenge, but we're up for it.
It's a key
Jeff,
challenge,
just to clear, your question is, how do these guys get a majority of the councillors on the councils that are involved to agree with their?
How do they get all the councils over the line with a proposal? Well, it's key, isn't it? It's key. You can do an awful lot of work, but if you actually haven't got,
I guess I just don't know that it's that.
I think it's an absolutely crucial question, actually.
Around here, doesn't it?
Councillor, what I would say first of all is having a robust business case in any of these propositions is going to be key here. Secondly, it's also gaining a critical mass of those willing councils, and often that is going to be the larger councils will create a bit of critical mass. And then sometimes if you have that momentum, the others that aren't necessarily convinced on day one will hopefully see the benefit and come on board. But I think part of the reason was independent chair, the CEO role being full-time, the focus on this rigour around business cases will give us the best possible chance as a company to get all the parties on board, but we accept that it won't work for everyone, but for the vast majority, hopefully it will, and we'll take those on the journey. And of course, there will be a variety of initiatives that we're pursuing.
Okay, thank you for that. Just one other question on the Three Waters collaboration that you're signalling in here. Can you just explain for me how that will fit in with possible wider government strategy in terms of what may come out in the future in terms of changes to the structure of how water is delivered? Do you see that this work that you're signalling would fit in with that? Or is it possible that, it could be superfluous? You could do this collaboration and then a whole new structure could be delivered or could be proposed. How does that work?
Okay, so the predominant focus of the Three Waters work is around asset management. I think regardless of what the government seeks to do around regulation and reform within the Three Waters area, it's not going to change that basic premise around the need for better asset management within local government, and the ability to obviously to hopefully sweat assets more in terms of realising that they've actually got a longer life than has been planned and all those sort of things. So I don't think anything is being risked in terms of this approach, in terms of the overall government's direction around regulation and reform. I think the other thing is that the champion of this within Waikato LAS has been Don McLeod from Manamana Piako District Council. He's on the working party with government on this work, so so we have that sort of connection, and very clear that there's no misalignment between what's happening here and what we believe will happen in the wider context.
Great, thanks, Gary. Thank you.
Bella.
Thank you, Chair. Kia ora koutou. Just a question. I see on your balance sheet that your software is almost fully amortised, and you have a strategy of digital transformation. I think I saw robotic processing in terms of added value going forward, but I don't see any sort of CapEx requirements going forward, unless I'm mistaken. What's your strategy around that?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. So, look, the software that we had there was SVDS. It was related to our valuation data services, and you're right, it is fully amortised this year, and we have actually just entered into a contract with an outfit called Cubatech, and that is a software as a service provision, and so it's going through as an operating cost in the future as opposed to CapEx. Hence that. In terms of the broader question around CapEx needs for future projects, our forecasts don't include either CapEx or operational requirements for those future projects unless we already know that they are happening, and LiDAR, aerial photography are a couple of examples of those, right? So beyond that, we would, as I say, develop a business case. Once that business case is approved, that would then be incorporated into our future financial forecasts, including capital requirements, if there were any.
Okay, thank you.
You're done? Okay. Andrew.
Yeah, my question is, why have we got so much local government's input into this model? Why have we got one independent director and a whole lot of CEs who will be there to protect their patch and to look after their council, and so we can't drive this thing forward in a full commercial effective way because we're almost hamstrung by all these local governments, CEs who are on the board? And why wouldn't we have it round the other way, where we had one CE, like say Vaughan from Regional Council, on the board who would report back with you to the mayoral forum and to the different councils, and then having a full majority independent board? And I guess my other part of that question is, it just seems a little bit close-minded, and I struggle to see how it's ever really going to get traction and fire forward. I think we've made a good step, but it's still heavily controlled by the councils. And my other question will be, are we really broadly looking at bringing in different areas across the councils and broadening this right out to really look at a full, at all our services? So there's two parts to that question. And then, yeah.
Right, so through you, Mr. Chair. So the first part of the question, the Constitution provides for up to 3 independent directors. At this stage, in terms of the consultation that we undertook, this was to appoint 1 independent director was a step in the, we felt, a step in the right direction. Ultimately, I do believe there will be 3, and that will then reduce the local government component of the board. But we felt at this stage this was an interim step, get the expertise of an independent director, independent chair, and then build on that. So in terms of what was acceptable from the discussions we'd had with the various shareholders, this was an acceptable first step to get there. I understand your concern, Mayor Andrew, that you don't see it's going far enough, and there are a number of people that feel that way, but we felt it's a step in the right direction, but there is provision to go further in the course of time. We need to demonstrate the benefits first. In terms of the second aspect of your question, which is the breadth of services.
Are we aggressively looking for opportunities?
Well, the answer is yes, we are. I mean, we've employed a business analyst who commenced this year, beginning of this year, and they are actively working with a number of different working parties in the IT area, in the HR area, in the health and safety area. What I left out? Yeah, but we are actively looking at those opportunities, realising that we need to demonstrate to you and to all the other shareholders the benefits of making this change very quickly. So very conscious of that.
Can I just add to that, Mayor Andrew? The board talked about whilst we're sort of going through this step, and ultimately we would like to get those 3 independent directors on the board, that we could utilise external facilitators to come in and also work with the board to workshop ideas. So whilst there may be, as you say, 5 council-appointed directors, 1 independent, that we could use external facilitators to also work with the board and workshop fashions to drive new ideas, to bring new concepts to the table, so that we weren't, as a board, thinking local government, we were actually being exposed, and there were basically all opportunities were being considered. Noting, of course, Councillor Leary's comments that we weren't off chasing dreams, but that we were exploring everywhere and chasing all the opportunities, because clearly we want to, as a board, to be able to demonstrate the benefits, because there is an increased cost to move to this transition. There's an increased cost in terms of the investment in the CEO and the staff, a cost to the independent chair. We were conscious that the more independent directors you bring on, there's a cost to that. So we wanted to demonstrate progress, but also in a reasonably short time frame, be able to come back and say we think it's appropriate now to go to a great number of independent directors when we can demonstrate the benefit of this transition. So it is a planned but deliberate step towards a more broad-based company structure.
So by having mainly independent-based board, if we did go that way, the shareholders still ultimately are in control at the end of the day.
Yes, and as Councillor Leary pointed out earlier, the Chief Executive Forum is a sort of a shareholder reference point. It's quite critical in terms of providing that council letter of expectation, direction, strategic point of strategic discussion. It becomes a critical point, and it's actually going to be a really critical point once this company change happens in the next month. We've already talked about how we would like to engage with that CEO forum, because as the Constitution has here, there are a number of councils who won't then have a director on the LAS board. They'll be looking for their point of engagement through that Chief Executive Forum.
So on page 151, under clause 13.1, C, is my interpretation on that, one may be appointed by Hamilton City Council, that we don't actually have to put up a staff member. We could actually move to put an independent director in on the board using that clause. I mean, I know that would never have been thought of in the wildest dreams of whoever wrote this, because it was written to ensure that CEs held control very tightly, but it appears to me that there's a possibility there that we could put up an independent.
That is absolutely correct. So the restriction is that an elected member cannot be on it, on the board.
Yep.
In fact, that was, the may is quite deliberate, and the reason for that was that it meant that we could maintain the board at a size which was around the 6-7 mark, and reduce the elected representative or the council representatives on that and replace them with independents at a point in the future.
And then the board does report back through the mayoral forum and back to the individual councils as you are here. So we by us putting up an independent, we aren't not out of the loop. We're still fully there, and we still have the opportunity to replace that independent person with a staff member in the future if we wanted to.
Yep.
Okay, so Mr. Chair, could I move the recommendation with an F, which says that Hamilton City Council ask a chief executive to recommend an independent director to replace our executive director of special projects at a future council meeting.
Okay, so you want that to be the, so that will be A, B, C, D, E, F. Yep, just get your wording, so your wording, did you get the wording? Or text it through, or maybe email it through.
Just shorthand it, so ask our chief executive
Or,
to recommend.
Andrew, sorry not to be rude, could you email it, because then I can let Paula start talking.
Okay.
Sorry. And then everyone will see it when it's
Who
up
am
there,
I
obviously.
emailing to? Rebecca, can I have your email address, please? Sorry. Or your...
Paula.
Something.
Thank you, Chair Gary. Just following on from the previous debate, the LAS has always reported quite strongly through the CO forum anyway, but also the mayoral forum, because, am I right in saying there has to be a political interface, because a number of the decisions that were previously made, the areas of business focus for LAS, were approved by councils at a political level. They do need to be approved. And they've fallen down in the same way. The water one fell down because of elected members, not because of lack of business case at all. So I just want to understand how the mayoral forum will be involved in this new structure, what you would see that working like, and how this board would work with elected members to ensure that sound business arrangements are upheld by a governance level. That's one question, then I have one more. I mean, that's the elephant in the room. It can fall down at a governance level. It did fall down for water at a governance level.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. Exactly what you said, Councillor Southgate, is correct. The LAS had and took on a number of Waikato Mayoral Forum projects as part of the work that it was doing. So if you like, it became a delivery vehicle for some of those work streams.
Yeah, that's right.
So yes, and I would imagine it may well continue to do that in the future. I mean, that's really up to the Mayoral Forum in terms of what direction they provide. We would continue to report to the Mayoral Forum, obviously for that reason, to keep up the dialogue and to keep that engagement with the shareholders. Also, as Mayor Andrew referred to, we'll continue to provide reports to the shareholders, the 6 monthly reports, the annual reports, statements of intent, all those things that will come directly to each individual council as well. So we'll continue to do that as well. I feel like I haven't answered a key part of the question there.
I think I can just add,
Yep.
obviously, the Mayoral Forum is sort of the guardians of the triennial agreement.
Yeah.
And so one of the triennial agreement things talks about shared collaborative initiatives, exploring ideas. So the Mayoral Forum obviously isn't there in a formal governance capacity, but obviously provides a collective oversight and input into the activities of LAS. And I guess with that triennial agreement, also can provide some support and governance direction to the initiatives that LAS is pursuing through the councils, if that helps.
Thank you. That does kind of, I might make a few comments in the debate, but just also the other piece of work that I think is critical to this is that piece of work undertaken by the Productivity Commission at the moment, in which they've been quite clear around some of the ways in which councils can unite and come together to make savings. And the expectation is that local government will embrace some of the ideas of the Productivity Commission. So can you just talk me through how LAS
That's a bit out of scope for here. We're trying to set a terms of
with all due respect, Mr Chair, I don't think it is. Because
yeah,
I'm
no, it is
asking,
all, I know it's all disrespectful, I understand that. But this debate has been going on for a long, long time, and you're adding stuff that I think is...
No, I'm asking if the LAS will form its decisions on the basis of some of the work of the Productivity Commission. I think it's relevant.
I think the simple answer is LAS wants to be closely aware of what the Productivity Commission identifies, and if there are opportunities, then LAS would most welcome the chance to explore those with our shareholding councils.
Thank you.
Just into this as well, each council currently has a program whereby we're engaging and looking at different ways of working and driving different initiatives forward. Well, the advantage of the LAS is that we can actually start using our drive and our innovation collectively. And so I think it's wrong to suggest that at a governance level these things fall over. In all cases, it's maybe a case that if we can actually get together as behind an organisation with one drive, we can actually influence a lot stronger.
Richard, I didn't say in all cases. I said it can fall over at the governance level.
Well, can fall over. This gives us greater advantage of one entity driving this forward from an influencing point of view and persuasion point of view.
Thank you. Siggy.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Through you, Mr Chair. Can I ask Mayor Andrew what he suggests? Is there any extra cost attached to that, to have an independent chair? Okay, but do you know or you don't know yet?
Yeah, an independent director will have to be paid.
Yeah.
As the chair at the moment is, he's on 45,000, I think the recommendation is. So there will be a cost, but by having sharp business people driving LAS forward, the return for that independent chair, the independent members' costs could also be outstanding. The return for the savings and innovation that could come through from a more broad-minded board than a local authority board, because after all, this is driving business.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. Thank you.
Just through the chair, the LAS, if Hamilton City Council chose to appoint an independent director in terms of our appointee, that would have to be at our cost. There's no budget provision within LAS for a Hamilton City Council appointed independent chair this time. So the board did contemplate that in time. There were 3 independents to replace some of the council appointed directors, that would be remunerated through the collective model, but if Hamilton chose to go earlier, it would be at our cost.
Angela.
I just want to move as an amendment then the staff recommendation.
Thank you. Jeff.
Yeah, look, I thank you for giving me another shot. I wasn't quite convinced with the answer I got in terms of that whole issue of bringing all the councils along with us on this, in terms of persuading them, about advantages. And I'm just wondering, is there any way that this can be just tightened up or something added to this just to give us a little bit more, to give us a feeling that council, there is real consensus here? And I'm wondering whether we can actually add another clause to the recommendations, just asking that all councils be asked to sign a heads of agreement, actually not just supporting these changes here, but supporting the intent of what LAS is trying to do with this new direction. It may just be...
Jeff, you're trying to, I think you're trying to get the impossible.
Well, I'm actually trying to make this as effective as we can from the get-go.
You're trying to
crossing my
listen.
fingers and hoping
And sorry,
for the best.
I don't mean to be rude, but you're trying to, in advance, ask councils to agree with everything that LAS does. I don't think that can be done.
That's not what I'm doing at all.
Can I be helpful through the chair, councillor? So by the councils agreeing to the statement of intent, which is part of the package of information and resolutions today, they, by virtue of approving the statement of intent, councillor, they are in effect agreeing to exactly what you're seeking, the fundamental transformation of the company. I think what I would point out here is shared services is not easy. If it was easy, it would just be happening, but it's a difficult space. LAS has achieved a lot, but the directors have made a fundamental decision here unanimously to change the company as described. It's a fundamental change. And they are not wearing their CEO hats, they're wearing their hats in terms of wanting the best outcome for local government in the region, and they are fully committed behind this, which is why they've happily agreed to the fundamental changes and they happily promote it to their council. So
where does it actually say that they're happily right behind this? How do we know that?
Well, I think
How explicit is that?
So, before this ever came to the shareholders, it was unanimously voted on by the directors as the future direction for the company. So that was that immediate response. Secondly, as I said, it has gone to all the shareholders to date, to the best of my knowledge. Every council that has voted on this has voted in favour, so they're supporting that direction. And we're not aware of any council that is not intending to support it, as far as we know. So I think that's kind of the most assurance we can give you. As Blair has said, the statement of intent is what we're asking you to support, and that does say this is the direction forward for the company, and that's what the directors will be and the board will be following, will be that statement of intent when it's finalised based on the feedback we get from the shareholders.
Okay.
Just to be clear, Kevin, at any time, every year the statement of intent will be put up to all the councils, and at any time those councils, one or all of them could say, no, we don't want that statement of intent. So, there's... Okay.
I suppose just to make sure that I understand Councillor Taylor's point, is not necessarily he's challenging whether or not the transformation has been agreed with by the other councils, is whether or not, and the chief executives, is whether or not the bold, aggressive new approach and the challenges that will bring along the lines of the Mayor's questions and Councillor Southgate's questions aren't going to, right from the get-go, stymie that ambition. So the challenge is whether or not there's enough clarity of the principles behind that bold approach encapsulated into the SOI that gives clear foresight to those councils that are signing it off, that they're comfortable enough with that ambition. Because if we don't actually have a unanimously agreed ambition, we're not going to deliver those outcomes. So that's where Councillor Taylor's coming from. It's not about the new structure, it's about the outcomes. And do you believe that that is actually encapsulated in the SIO well enough so that the participating councils actually have their eyes wide open that this is going to be a game changer?
So my answer to that, Mr Chair, is yes, we do. I mean, again, a lot of debate around the board table to start with, and very clear about the direction the company was going. A lot of talk around digital transformation, that was the pathway forward. So I do believe that everyone is very clear on what that intent is. However, I mean, if your council does not feel that it's clear enough, then in terms of your feedback to that statement of intent, include something that makes it even clearer and satisfies you in terms of the direction you want to see going forward.
Thanks, Kevin. Rob?
Thanks. Couple of questions. One, perhaps to Calvin around operational aspects. How do you see the new LAS, if you like, with its fewer board members representing shareholders? How do you see it taking on a possible project that that might be, or might need to, or could have been suggested by one of the shareholder groups? And I use a good example for us at the moment. We're going through a new Kukuri, we call it, which is new software being introduced for our accounting function. Now, to me, one of the obvious projects for LAS would be to have a centralised software system and a bureau that does most of that work. How would an idea like that, as a startup, come through you and become potentially a project that LAS might take on for the benefit of us and other councils who might come on board at some later stage?
Yep, so thank you, Councillor, through the Chair. Yeah, look, so as I said earlier on, I mean, those ideas could come from anywhere, but presupposing that they came from a working party discussion, which would be pretty much typical. We've now got, as mentioned earlier, business analyst resource on board at the moment. So generally speaking, the working party to whom that idea relates, if it's health and safety or procurement, whatever, would establish a project team, which would generally be a subset of that working group, but maybe other people that have different technical skills that will help develop that idea. And in conjunction with that business analyst, they'd work up the opportunity and bring back an initial assessment to that working party of what the likely benefits, costs and risks might be. And then depending on, we've simply classified it as simple or significant, which is essentially to say, can the idea live within the budget and the delegated authorities of the people sitting around the working party itself? If it can, then it's simple and it would just be dealt with by that working party. If it's more complicated, as you're referring to, then that initial opportunity assessment would be worked up into a proper business case that would be brought to the LAS board for approval.
So it could take there could be quite a long timeline involved.
Yeah, look, there could.
Which might then kill the idea, I suppose, if the council is in need to move. The individual council is in need to move a little faster.
Yep. And, you know, LIDA, for example, is a situation where, you know, the project through LAS wasn't going to work as quickly as it needed to for some, and that's absolutely fine. But having said that, I'm very conscious that we want to be agile, and that's part of the reduction in the board numbers. And the fact that we have got in-house resource here, that's about speeding things up. It's not about slowing things down. So, you know, I'd like
So there are some big challenges, aren't there, around where we might get some really good economies of scale, either in the accounting function or in waters or...
Absolutely. And I mean, the reality is these things have some, as I say, they're bold, can be bold ideas, right? So, and the intention is to disrupt how councils are working, and that will not sit easily with everyone.
Yep.
So there's no doubt there's challenges.
Thank you for that answer. And the second question is perhaps to Gavin, who's been around this board table for quite a number of years. Are you sensing from within the existing board and what the new board might look like that there is a real wish to renew many of the projects that LAS could do that they haven't done in the past? Or is, and I don't want to downplay, you know, the work that you've done, or is this perhaps another attempt to see whether we could get LAS to work a little better, or no, to cover more projects and work a better in terms of cost savings for councils than perhaps it has in the past?
So through you, Mr Chair, can I kind of answer both questions? So your first question to Kelvin, the thing I would say is, if we're smart, one of the first things we'll be doing is a stock take of where we're at with things like IT projects. So instead of actually what you're doing now, knowing what's coming up next year for the various councils and the year after and the year after that, so we've actually got some guidelines around what the future might look like and what the opportunities may be in the future. So there isn't such a delay around being able to deal with that. That's the first thing. The second thing is, there is a real commitment to making this work. There's a commitment to being bold. There's a commitment to moving this forward and exploring areas that LAS hasn't been involved in up till now. We've dealt with some fringe areas around IT, around aerial photography, GIS, or the geographic information systems, those kind of things. But there's lots more opportunities in that area, but we need to be more, as Kelvin has said, more agile and able to take up those opportunities and be a bit more aggressive, I think, in terms of making them and turning them into real options for the future. One of the pieces of work that we had done was a digital strategy, which actually David helped us with as a company, so that we could look and try and get some, just some general strategy around what the opportunities may be in the future. So that's also helping to inform that. But I do think it's different. LAS has been through, and you're quite right, Councillor Pascoe, and I've been involved for quite some time, but it's been through a series of changes. This is another change, but it's the biggest change that LAS will have and has ever had since its inception in 2004. So yeah, I'm optimistic that we will move this forward and challenge in different areas that haven't been tackled up till now.
Thank you.
So through the chair, just to add to what Gavin's been talking about, I'm a member of the Shared Services Working Party, so I meet regularly with all the CFOs around all the councils. The things that are different here is that LAS wasn't resource before, apart from a part-time CE, and no other resource, right? And in conjunction with that, there was a lack of, I suppose, cohesion and commitment from each council, because they were all on their own journeys in terms of back office and their investment in IT infrastructure, for example, which they had to run its economic life before they were able to jump on board with a shared service IT structure like the accounting system that you talked about, Councillor Pascoe. So the renewed commitment from the CEs, or should I say not renewed, but what is new is an unwavered vision of being able to deliver the best outcomes for the 12 councils through the LAS, whatever that might look like. It's challenging the norm and getting business cases that are robust through increased resources at LAS is going to provide a platform for us to do the right thing for all councils. It needs to be said that there are going to be winners and losers, right? We have smaller councils that provide jobs for people in their local communities, and to centralise a function is going to impact that council. But there are other ways we can combat that through virtual teams with the use of the internet and making sure that we can leverage the best skills that we have around the 12 councils. So there's a significant opportunity here. Councillor Taylor is exactly right in terms of needing to make sure that everyone stays the course and shares that vision for better outcomes for the councils, and I think that that's fundamentally needs to be our line of sight. There are a lot of projects that will not happen in the next 12 months. It might be a longer game of 3 years or 5 years. But what it is about setting a principle where we're all sharing our ideas and sharing our investment stories and making sure we align ourselves so we get to a point in the future where more and more is done more cost effectively, and we're able to leverage and support our smaller councils with regard to the knowledge that we have in the broader LAS group of councils.
All right. No more questions. We have an amendment, which is actually the staff recommendation. I'm pretty sure. Is that correct? I can't remember who were the movers and. Say that again. Yep, sure. Okay, so the original's in your papers, or in your case on your screen. And the amendment is the motion. Sorry, I beg your pardon. the motion is the amendment plus that, is that correct? Is that right, Andrew? Yeah. So, yeah, so just to be clear, the amendment which we're discussing and voting on first is in your papers. The motion is exactly the same as the amendment plus the yellow F. Okay, so sorry, so it's Paula and David Dave have. No, it's not. Okay, so can just someone say who? I don't know who the names are. Who are the names?
Councillor O'Leary and Councillor Stafford.
Okay, so Angela, you're the mover. Yeah, and Paula's the seconder. Okay. Okay, discussion on the amendment.
Request the chief executive. It's the Hamilton City Council chief executive, isn't it?
Thank you. And do we have we need a seconder for the motion?
I'll get it to you anyway, Kelvin.
Thank you.
Oh, I'll second it then. Okay. So that's, okay, we happy to debate both at the same time? Okay, all right. We'll start off with Angela.
Motion first.
Is that how we normally do it? I thought we were, okay, all right. Andrew.
So this is very simple. We have been asked to put up a staff member from Hamilton City Council. We have an independent director, an independent chair, which I think is fantastic. If we are going to let go of controllers and let it be driven aggressively by a group of business people, I believe that we can set the example by Hamilton City Council letting go of a staff member sitting there all the time, keeping an eye on what's going on, and give it to an independent, which would be selected by our chief executive, and I imagine that he would work closely with the independent chair, Kelvin, in choosing that person to ensure that we start to build up a group of independents, the best independent people to drive infrastructure and renewals forward for the councils, and to also work aggressively to look across councils to see what else can be brought into this for cost savings. Yes, it is going to cost a small amount extra with an extra salary for a part-time independent member, but the savings by having the right people around that table could be significant, and I imagine will be significant in time. I also would encourage other councils to let go and do the same. I think we only need one chief executive from local government who don't have the business skills to drive this type of thing forward, which is about cost savings and good service. And one person on here as a chief executive, I think, is sufficient for that person then to feed back from the mayoral forum and back from councils back up into the group of independents feedback. And of course, just don't forget, members, that we are the shareholder. We are one of the shareholders and we're a major shareholder, and so at the end of the day the shareholders do control the board anyway. So if you don't like the direction it's going in, you can reverse this out again at any time. So I just see let's lift this to a far more commercial model to make this work. And I know there's a lot of fear around it, that we want to be in control, we want our voice around the board table, we want to have, and each one of these councils here on page 151 will want that control. We have that control through our shareholding, and the shareholders control the board. So I ask you to support this motion.
Thanks, Andrew. Angela.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Look, I appreciate the intent that the motion seeks to achieve, but I think this is about timing, and I don't think the time moving to a new structure and a new purpose for LAS, the timing is quite right. I think that there is benefit in a continuity of knowledge as LAS goes through this transition, and I think that that's really important. As we heard from staff, Our current director who is appointed is first off the list anyway, and that would be, in my view, the appropriate time to then, if we want to go down an independent director route, that we do that.
Paula.
Yeah, just support those previous comments. Also, I do have faith in the ability of staff to do an equal job to outside business people in some respects. They're certainly across the matter quite fully. There again, a flag of caution is that I have seen this happen before, that support for an initiative that could be really good has to be bought into at a governance level. It has to have because we're the people who represent the public, and this is a public well-being that we're talking about, economic well-being for our ratepayers. So at the end of the day, nearly always this ends up in a council chamber somewhere. And so doing the work ahead of that is vital. So I really do support the new structure that you've got, because I think it will give some gravitas and depth to the proposals that come back to council. But we ignore elected members at our peril. We do. And I have to say that I think that we need better reporting out of the mayoral forum on a more regular basis. It is right that the mayor attends those forums and speaks on behalf of his council. So that suggests to me that there is discussion prior to the mayoral council about the kinds of initiatives that we'd like to support, and that when the mayoral council has occurred, the mayoral forum, I should say, the mayoral forum has occurred, that there is a report back to those councils. It's got to take people on the journey, because that's where the risk is at the end of the day. When you will get to a proposition that needs to be taken by vote around the council table. So that two-way communication between the mayoral forum, the chief executives forum, LAS and so on, and the elected members is absolutely vital, because it will fall down at the weakest link in the chain. And that's all I'm going to say on that.
Rob.
Yeah, look, I support both the motion and the amendment, although I think the amendment could eventually produce the same outcome as the motion could, as we through the flux of time and as the new structure gets itself up and running. But more importantly, I do support the restructure. I think it'll be great to have a smaller board and to bring on board independent directors, and initially starting off with an independent chair. I've always thought that there's huge untapped resources that we, as 12 separate LGAs in this geographical area, can do, or some things that we can do together, and we can do them together much more efficiently than we do when we do them all separately. And, you know, we've talked today about the accounting function, but there's also various products and services. And, of course, the real biggie for us in this area is trying to get a waters project that we can get agreement on, and we can either collectively pool our assets together, or we can use a company which will own those assets to efficiently deliver our three waters. We seem more than often not to operate in separate silos, and yet we are all doing the same things administratively. And of course, when we do that, it comes up with significantly higher costs for our ratepayers. So I see if we can do this successfully and efficiently via the LAS company, then we can also reduce costs, which will then reflect on benefits as far as our ratepayers are concerned across the region. Thank you.
Jeff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm highly supportive of giving LAS more horsepower, which is what's happening here. I welcome a more proactive approach, the thought leadership in terms of finding new service delivery models, bold and disruptive. That's exactly what we need. So that's great. I still have reservations. The difficulty will always be getting the councils to come along for the ride. It's going to depend on the quality of the business cases, on the quality of the persuasiveness, if you like, of the shareholding councils. No matter how good the ideas are, the success or failure of LAS over the next couple of years is just going to depend on how many councils you get over the line. That's the key, and that's what I've been trying to test today, really, whether or not you feel the intent here, their support for the statement of intent is there. Are they going into this with their eyes wide open? That's what I've been asking you today. Do we need to strengthen it right from the start? You're telling me no. You think everybody's on board here. So I guess that remains to be seen, and I really hope it does, because I'm highly supportive of this initiative. In terms of the motion or amendment, I'm a bit like Councillor Pascoe. I actually think both will do the job. I do like the idea of us leading by example, as the Mayor says, with an independent director. But I'm not. It's not die in the ditch stuff for me. The main thing is for me, I support this initiative. I just want it to work as well as it possibly can, and I'll just think a bit more about and listen to a few other thoughts before I make a final call on that. Thanks.
Ryan.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to applaud you guys for the work you've done thus far. It's been a challenging space, and you've had that report done, and you haven't looked at it and chucked it away. You've actually taken those recommendations and endorsed them, and I'm excited to see a much more nimble board and what's going to come out of that. I heard our CEO Richard say over there before, it could be, he mentioned game changer, and I really think this could be a game changer if you do it well, and I can sense you guys are passionate about doing that. And I think it could be a real showcase for other councils around New Zealand or other territories to say, look, this is what can be done when we collaborate and work together and really drive efficiencies for our space. So yeah, I look forward to seeing some positive things come out of it.
Thank you. I'll just quickly say some things. This has all the opportunities of the economies of scale. We can get the non-overcapitalisation of everyone having theatres and everyone having whatever it is, rugby fields, cricket ground, all that sort of stuff. And it was what Jeff was getting asking you questions about. We do have to accept that we are in a political situation. We're not in a market situation where people are making decisions with their own money. It's a whole lot of people, elected people, making the decisions. And I understand what you're trying to get, but you just can't expect someone to sign up to something and then every subsequent elected council will come on board. So that is the difficulty we're going to face, and we have faced it in the past over a lot of situations. So I don't know that Jeff may have been tilting at windmills or something, but I just think he was asking for something that cannot be achieved, and I don't think that anything we can do in the structure where you're set up or anything like that will change that. You're going to be at the mercy of the politicians all the time, and that's just the reality of the thing. There is no more debate. We will move voting on the amendment, which is actually the staff recommendation in our papers. Oopsie daisies. Sorry, I went the wrong way.
We'll reset.
Well, that was quick. No one knows.
James, could you re-vote? Paula, have you voted? The amendment is carried, 9-4, 4 against.
Now we have to put the amendment as the motion. Okay.
The amendment as a substantive motion is declared carried, 12-4, 1 against.
Thank you. Righto, members, we have our last of our external presenters here now. Okay, just keep it coming.
Huh? Okay, thank you. Just before we start this, there is a possibility we are going to have a lunch break, and then we have to start our meeting our council meeting at 2:00. There might be a couple of things is it possible that we would come back after the council meeting to finish some things off?
2 o'clock or later. Yeah.
2 o'clock or later? Do we not have to start that council meeting at 2?
No, just as soon.
Can we?
Start later.
Oh, okay, all right. So if there's a bit of flexibility at that end, we might be okay. Okay. So we're on item 10, 156, the airport.
Mr Chair, if I could just make a couple of introductory remarks. Mark Morgan, who I think everyone knows, the CEO of the airport company, has a brief presentation for you, but I have a couple of items just to raise before he does so. First of all, just to remind everyone that the new chairman of the Waikato Regional Airport Limited, Barry Harris, will be in his new position on the 1st of May. So he has begun his induction, if you like, with the board of RAL, but he takes up that role on 1 May. The second thing I'd just like to say is I sent a message through to the chairman and Democracy Services yesterday afternoon proposing an alteration to the staff recommendation to this paper, and I'd like to talk to that at the conclusion of Mark's presentation, if that's okay with you, sir.
Has that been circulated to everyone?
I don't think Democracy has. I think they will put the wording up and I'll talk that through.
Okay.
Yep. So if I could hand over to Mark.
Thanks, Sean. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity to update you again on the airport and the RAL group, the wider group. What I'll do is move through this reasonably quickly, but in respect of our first 6 months, so the period ending December 18, really the key highlights, again, you'll see very high passenger growth rates when I get to that slide, which has resulted in a double-digit profit growth on that year-on-year period. Our CAA recertification, and I think from a shareholder perspective, that's our 5-yearly recertification with civil aviation, big piece of work, and we were recertified about October last year. Our landing charge consultation, and I'll take you through the impact of that, but that was a piece of work that took most of calendar 2018, so that's our consultation primarily with Air New Zealand from a commercial airline activity and principally with L3 and the Aero Club regarding general aviation, and that's resulted in a very positive impact on our financial performance going forward from the 1st of January this year. Our property, we continue with strong land sale inquiries and our capital works developments are on track, and you'll see through 3 or 4 slides the capital program we've got underway. And then I'm not speaking so much to tourism today because obviously Jason Dawson updates you from Hamilton Waikato tourism, but I think the couple of points here around they've had a busy 6-month period adopting the major event strategy and of course the launch of the Mighty Waikato brand. So what does this mean in terms of the financials? We've got some year-on-year comparatives there because I think it's a more useful slide. Just make sure you can see that clearly. So look, the darker blue in the columns is the first half year of each of the years, and the lighter blue is the second half year performance. And you can see for 18-19 that includes a forecast component for the balance of this financial year. So the key point, you can see that our passenger volume continues to grow year on year, showing at 7 or 8% on that slide. I think the other point is the load factors. So we've grown our load factors from 75% to 80%. So that's an important milestone for Air New Zealand. So they're looking for load factors, if you like, north of 80% across their regional network. Now, we've got Wellington and Christchurch that are actually hovering up into the early 80s. And in January, February, March of this year, we continue to have strong growth. Last month, we grew at 10%, and in February, 13% year on year. So the growth rates continue. And that has been supported by... Just want to check. That has been supported by an increase in capacity. So Air New Zealand has introduced a further 10% capacity on the Christchurch route in November, principally off-peak, and 4% into the Wellington route. So we are getting increased capacity, but that's been more than consumed by the market demand, hence the increase in loadings. That flows through, of course, into the airport revenue. You can see there, essentially, you'd expect the airport revenue, give or take, to be in line with the passenger growth, which it is slightly ahead. Our landing charges, 5% growth, so that just reflects principally the aircraft movements, and principally the general aviation component in there is the biggest variable. Our aircraft movements, really no change, but you can see it's 68,000. So we'll annualise about 145,000 movements. And as I've said before, that makes us the second busiest aerodrome in New Zealand behind Auckland in respect of aircraft movements. Our property and concession income up 15%, which is a strong growth. That's on the back of a couple of new leases, but principally it's on the back of rent reviews that are driven out of our increasing land value around the airport, because most of these, a significant portion, are ground lease reviews. And the car park revenue, which at 14%, again, is growing ahead of passenger numbers. There's no change to the rate card, so that is simply about the demographic, the profile of people bringing their cars to the airport when they are travelling. What does that do to the financials? And again, I've put the history in there, and there's a couple of key points I'd like to make on this slide. First of all, the dark blue is the historical and future aeronautical income, or in fact profit, or indeed loss. And the lighter blue is the income the group is now, the profit it's now achieving out of its non-aeronautical income. So you can see that back to 2014, which I've talked about before, quite significant loss for the group at $750,000, forecasting now through. And I think, as you can see, the encouraging point about 2018, 19 and 20 is the dark blue, the aeronautical profit that is now coming into the group. And in particular, 19 and 20 as a result of the landing charge consultation. So that delivers, in a 12-month period, will deliver about $1.4 million in additional profit to the group. So has quite a substantial impact. And then you can see the non-aeronautical, which is principally the margin from land sales, as well as some of our other lease strategic acquisitions, but principally land sales. And you can see the benefit they produce. The 2020 year, you'll see a very strong profit budgeted at $3.5 million. And there'll be a slight change to the final SOI that you receive, and that's essentially due to our land sales on our southern precinct. It's about $5 million of land sales that we had hoped to settle by 30 June, but title is unlikely to issue until July or early August, which won't allow us to settle, which is, if you like, pushed that margin into the 2020 year, hence such a significant increase. I'm just going to very briefly appraise you. We've done the most major piece of research at the airport that's probably been conducted in the last 10 to 15 years. We commissioned a company out of Queensland who operate and support about 25 airports across Australasia, including about 8 in New Zealand. They have very strong experience. The principals have both worked for airlines over a long period of time, prior to setting up what's called Lime Intelligence, and they've got some proprietary information around the recording and producing reporting information on passenger numbers, scheduling, and looking at the future opportunity that the schedules, they pull all of the airline data into a washing machine, if you like, and produce some very good profiling. They also conducted the research, and look, essentially what we were looking to do was understand our route connectivity, both what is happening now and what the opportunities are, what is the demand profile, and most importantly, what is the supply profile, because it's all very well to have the demand, but if the airline can't provide any more metal or seats, then there's a challenge. And finally, a plan of attack for the next 3 years in terms of how we engage with airlines. I won't stay on this other than to really indicate to you that we have a very strong connecting market, and I'll just demonstrate that by showing you Dunedin on the left-hand side. We have 17,000 people that travel out of Hamilton every year that transit through Wellington or Christchurch onto Dunedin. So, as we now understand that across all of those destinations, we're better able to advocate with the airlines, particularly in New Zealand, around either better scheduling, better price connectivity, so not just the point-to-point, but the full, say, Hamilton to Dunedin. And as you grow the connecting market, you start to build arguments for direct services. So it's been a really important piece of information to understand. The next slide, the only point I want to make here is I think the impact that we're discovering as an airport company we can make. And if we look at the green bubbles at the bottom, the point here is that 18 months ago, 72% of respondents had not considered Hamilton when they were travelling out of Auckland. A year later, 80% had considered Hamilton, hadn't necessarily travelled out of Hamilton, but at least had considered. So we have increased the awareness and the consideration around flying out of Hamilton as opposed necessarily to Auckland. Our profile hasn't changed. Roughly you can see there that about just over 50% are business versus leisure. That does change slightly depending on the route. This is just to let you know, this is the 3-year sales pipeline. So we've looked at Air New Zealand, Jetstar and the regional carriers. And with Lime Intelligence, we are now going to work through a 3-year program. I'll give you a good example for argument's sake. Air New Zealand's next new ATR delivery is August next year into New Zealand. And we've been advocating now for 6 months on the Hamilton Christchurch route. I know that we're one of certainly 2 routes that Air New Zealand are considering for the majority use of that aircraft. But the point is we're advocating 2 years out from the arrival of that aircraft, and it's that kind of approach we have to take to the much wider opportunity of trying to grow services out of the region. It doesn't happen overnight. Air New Zealand have 26 ports in New Zealand. They have their global ports, and all the airport companies are advocating just like we are on a monthly basis. So whilst Air New Zealand have the starter, their decision-making is often skim deep, so they'll look at the main opportunities. It's up to the airport companies to unpick the nuggets and to present those to them. We meet with Air New Zealand every month. A month or so ago, our marketing manager who put together a presentation, the feedback we got that Hamilton had provided the most comprehensive research of a regional airport that Air New Zealand had received in the last couple of years. So I think the better we get to know our port, our opportunities, the better we can advocate and the more credibility we have when we're dealing with the airlines. Look, this is, in respect of property, I thought the easiest update was actually really just to take you through the map because it perhaps has a wee bit more context, and I'll just, again, a very busy period. We've extended, firstly, the area around the terminal, so the car park, we put in another 85 car parks. We changed all of the car park equipment. We're about to relocate the pay station, you'll be pleased to know, out of the car park. Not quite over the road, but look, we've now got the technology is very reliable. You know, if you tap on entry and tap on exit, you don't even need to go to the ticketing stations, etc. It's very advanced. It is the most advanced technology available at the moment in Australasia. We now have licence plate recognition, so we've tagged one or two of our directors and a few others just to make sure that the process is working okay on licence plate recognition. So that's about $1 million investment, done and dusted, under budget. We've just opened the southern precinct, which is the blue precinct to the bottom left as you look at the map. So we're opening up that road at the moment, which is a $3 million investment in roading and infrastructure. We have sold $5 million worth of land in that southern precinct, which is the land I was talking about earlier on. So we'll have about 4.5 hectares of land left to sell under stage 2. In the red central precinct, we're about to open stage 4. We've now sold all land in stage 3. So 1, 2 and 3 are sold. We'll open another 2 to 3 hectares of land, which should serve our requirements for the next couple of years. Point though that I would make, that I didn't make under the finance slide, I think what we're now seeing is the returning profitability of the base aeronautical business does allow us to make sure that when we're selling land, we're selling it sensibly, we're taking an opportunity of a rising market in terms of land sale rates, and that we're selling sufficient land to fund some of our acquisitions, such as the airport hotel, but that we're keeping that in context of perhaps the property strategy. It's still absolutely the right strategy, but it does afford us to be cautious in terms of executing that property strategy. We don't need to rush it. And then look, if we look over on the northern precinct, which is the green, the farm, as some of you will know it, we're about to undertake a private plan change, which will perhaps take us the next 9 to 12 months. There are 40 hectares of land that's zoned industrial commercial. We want to rezone those 40 hectares on the farm, as well as deal with some of the issues around Three Waters and roading, particularly in the context of Southern Links. And I think this is perhaps a good time just to introduce the H2A and the Northern Corridor process, and making sure that obviously the airport and its land holdings is strategic, both from an aeronautical perspective, so it's about future-proofing the aeronautical capability of the airport, and making sure that it integrates well into the plan. But equally, the non-aeronautical opportunities that potentially the Northern Corridor presents around Southern Links, around the development of land in this, I guess, the strategic golden circle of on Cambridge, Te Awamutu, Hamilton, as well as the wider Golden Triangle. So that's principally the work going on in property. I will just mention briefly the hotel. I think you're well appraised. We've just set up a hotel company, which is, if you like, a CCO, RAL being its shareholder. The hotel, we transitioned 13th of May, so Jet Park take over on the 13th of May. And between May and September, we'll do the majority of the renovation. So we'll start the end of April on the external remediation. So when you come out later in May, there'll be a nice new shiny paint job on the hotel. And then after field days, we'll start the internal fit out, and that is a major. So that's a complete replacement of the kitchen, the bar, the restaurant, complete refurbishment of all of the rooms. So the reception moves to the front of the hotel where the conference centre is. And you name it, we're replacing it inside the property to turn it into a 4-star and we intend to launch it in November, and we'll certainly be inviting you out at that point. So very excited about that opportunity. I think it's going to be a cornerstone investment for the Rao Group over the next 5 to 10 years, and it needs a larger critical mass, and if it performs to where we think it will perform over the next 2 or 3 years, then there's opportunity to do more in terms of expansion of that property. The statement of intent, very briefly, this is the current 18-19. Essentially, everything is on track there. You'll see a couple of small crosses. Essentially, that's the decision we've taken to expense quite a bit of work around the hotel that was not budgeted. So there'll be upwards of $500,000 that will be expensed. But in essence, we have delivered on what we said we would. And you'll see that your equity, your shareholder funds has improved back slightly above 80%. Moving forward to 1920, really no difference in terms of the draft statement of intent we have sent to all shareholders at the end of February. Our core purpose remains the same, and our key objectives, sort of split under airport, property and tourism, remain the same. I think, though, that the next slide, this slide is interesting for you, which just endorses my comment around less reliance on the margin coming from land sales. Bearing in mind that this is a revised, based on the transfer of those land sales into the 1920 year. But the point I want to demonstrate is if you look at the blue bar, which is in essence the profit bar, accepting that the statement of intent is always a conservative approach to the shareholders and is always a flaw, if you like, what I think you can see that the columns to the left, the purple, are the land sales, and you can see that through the 3 years there's great volatility on land sales but very little actual impact on profitability, and that's because of the underlying strength now of the aeronautical business. And you can see the impact, the other two columns are the EBITDA with land sales included and without land sales. So I think as I say, from a shareholder comfort perspective, we're doing exactly what we hoped to do, which was to improve the aeronautical business, to improve the non-aeronautical opportunities, and to stabilise the group's financial position. All right, just the last slide. Looking forward, I'll only focus on what I haven't talked about. So quite a bit of work going on with my team and myself around the development and aligning our 3-year strategy to skills and individual development required. The hotel's a great example. None of us have run a hotel before, and whilst we've employed a hotel manager, we need to understand much more about that as a good example. And as we develop the Northern Precinct, huge amount of opportunity, unlocking the potential of that precinct. And again, there is knowledge required to do that. I think other than that, the sustainability framework, we're doing quite a bit of work right at the moment in that space with one of our directors, and that's really considering the approach that Rao should have to sustainability. We're very, you can easily focus on environmental sustainability, but the sustainability picture in a much wider context. So we are adopting the Tourism New Zealand framework, which has been adopted by the Airport Association, and that has sort of 14 principles of sustainability, and you'll start to see that eventually particularly flow through into how we report and measure our success around sustainability. And quite a bit of work going on with the upgrade of the terminal later this year and into 2020, and I think all the other points I've covered. So that's it from me, Chair.
Thanks. Sorry, I'm just trying to get my screen back to... Yeah, Sorry, I can't see who wants to talk. All right. Mark.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark, and to your directors. Big fan, and really excited about what you're doing. just looking at worldwide trends with regards of the Amazons and the freight and much more online purchasing, are you noticing trends that we should be ready for? Like, isn't more warehousing around there, and are we ready for it?
Look, I think what we are seeing is, first, I don't think we can draw the freight parallel necessarily to the airport because, as I've mentioned before, you do need that commercial jet services for freight,
Right.
and that's international freight more than domestic air freight. But look, what we are seeing is an interest in trend, and Vizzy's a good example. We've probably had 2 or 3 serious inquiries from Auckland-based manufacturing distribution type companies looking for 5 to 15 hectares of land to relocate and to develop. So I think that trend is definitely growing. And in fact, I was up a couple of weeks ago and had a good look at the Highbrook development. Those of you that have been out there, it's obviously owned by Goodman. It's 100 hectares, so it's similar size to the farm. And they've now developed and let 98% of Highbrook. So that's an example of just the fact that there are limiting options now in Auckland. Very expensive land prices, north of $400 a square metre. So I think that's where the opportunity lies, not only for ourselves, obviously APL developing in Hautapu, buying 50 hectares of land there, which will be, I think, a cornerstone for development in that area. So commercial land does remain an opportunity because there are constraints on it.
Right, but you're sort of saying it's capacity is the issue when it comes to being a freighter. Okay, thank you. Regards the Air New Zealand point earlier on, you're talking with them and with the other airlines and about routes, etc. How much influence do we actually have? Because it's up to them, isn't it? As to where the routes go, isn't it? So how much influence do we have over those guys?
I think you've been talking to my directors.
No.
Same question gets asked. Look, I think we have limited, but I think the point I was making about being able to generate. So I think our opportunity is to generate demand and awareness of the airport, which in turn feeds into capacity issues, which feeds into the airline having to reassess their schedules, which is exactly what they've done. I mean, look, in just over 2.5 years, we've grown 100,000 passengers per annum. Look, ultimately, of course, they will make the decision, but if you put strong, credible evidence in front of them, grow demand, they'll respond.
Or competition, like, for example, say Chatham Air decided to come in here. So where are we at with those guys? They're getting a bit more aggressive, aren't they?
Yeah, look, we wanted to do this piece of research because, look, you have to be informed to approach the likes of Air Chatham's, and look, you might see even today they've just announced that they're now providing a route through to Norfolk Island. So, and of course they picked up the Paraparaumu to Auckland service. So look, we of course talked to these. One of our geographic location is a challenge. So the Hamilton Auckland is an opportunity that we've always wanted to try and reprogress. But equally, the Hamilton, then you've got quite long distances on their aircraft sizing. So if you want to fly to the likes of Christchurch or Nelson's okay, but that's about as further south as those aircraft can fly comfortably out of Hamilton. So there is, it's a much longer burn for those reasons.
Right. Okay. The aeronautical charges, etc. Obviously, in New Zealand are your key hold there. Does that affect your aero clubs, the little guys on the other side of the strip?
Yes, it does. We negotiate at the same time, or should I say we consult, because we're not required to negotiate, and we're just required to consult and form a view. Yes, it did. So there was an impact for anyone flying into the airport under the general aviation banner. There was an increase in landing charges for them.
Right, and is that proving okay, or?
Absolutely. Look, the increase, was reasonable. It could certainly have been higher had we applied the full recovery methodology. But their rates increased about 25%.
Okay. And
which is over bearing in mind that's been a 5-year period.
yeah, and just lastly, Air New Zealand had a big sort of a price drop thing they touted hugely. Did that affect numbers at all here, or is it too soon?
Okay, it's too soon. I mean, we don't have the ability to correlate the fare and the occupancy, if you like, of the aircraft. We don't have that visibility, and the airlines guard that fiercely.
Yeah.
But it's fair to say that we've seen in the last couple of months the strongest year-on-year monthly growth that we've had in the last couple of years. So anecdotally, you join the dots.
Yeah, great. Thanks, mate.
James.
Comprehensive presentation. You were mentioning about the 68,000 or 145,000 air movements. You were
So 68 being the 6 monthly, so I've just doubled the numbers basically.
Yeah. Okay. Just wondering how many of those movements would be attributed to the air school?
The air school on an annualised basis is somewhere between 70 and 75% of the movement volume.
All right. Do they pay any sort of annual fee or a landing takeoff fee to the
They pay a landing charge.
Okay.
Yep. So the exact amount I think should remain commercially sensitive to them, but certainly they pay a methodology. So for each landing, they pay per landing.
All right. Now the land sales you've had, will that affect any future development or expansion of the runway for, say, I don't know, any future international flights or anything?
No, look, it doesn't. We have, and I didn't put the map up, this particular map up, but we have an aeronautical master plan, and of roughly our 330 hectares of land that the airport company currently owns, we're only contemplating selling about 25 hectares of it, so less than 10%. The master plan protects about 200 hectares of land, which allows for both a runway extension and also apron extension, taxiway extension, and terminal and hard stand extensions. So, and we're very so that is the guiding principle. We will not sell land that would compromise the master plan.
Okay. And just a final one with Jet Park. Is that the same company, or the same one that runs the one in Auckland, the Jet Inn? Or?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
So Auckland Airport and Rotorua.
Oh, okay. So are they, just asking, are they going to have free parking there for passengers as well? So I know that Jet Inn do it in Auckland, where if they fly international, whatever, they can have up to 14 days free parking, I think it is.
Look, we haven't. I'm conflicted with that question, but we haven't had those conversations. And look, generally the profile of the person staying at historically staying at the hotel is not necessarily flying out of in or out of the airport, but certainly it's something that we will need to consider. And look, happy to respond to that. Probably no different to the fact, on a much smaller scale, Mavis, the cafe, we provide 2 hours free parking if you have a certain minimum spend at the cafe. So I guess there's a precedent for that kind of logic.
Okay, thank you.
Ziggy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that report. I always love to hear about the airport and what's happening there. Look, just quick, you have already explained to Councillor Bunting about the landing charge increase. I just want to check with you if there's any other airlines coming in, small airlines, will that be a deterrent, the landing charges, or they're not that extremely high?
Look, I don't think it's a deterrent in the sense that the landing charges are always passed on by the airline to the passenger. Okay. So it comes down then to can they have a competitive fare that will attract the customer, and how much of a burden, if you like, is the landing charge component of the air ticket. But this has the materiality. Simply put, is about for Air New Zealand is about $4 onto the landing charge increase from the 1st of January.
Okay.
So if the airfare is 200 or 250 or 180 or 150, that's the materiality.
Okay. Second question is, you talked about that you are following the new Tourism New Zealand framework for sustainability. So how are you tracking in that, or if you just started with that?
Literally just started.
Okay.
So and part of this was born out of the environmental component. So as we renovate parts of the terminal, what should we be thinking about? Rain harvesting, solar, making sure we've got efficient lighting. What are we going to do about waste collection in the terminal and separation of plastics, etc. So that's where the process started, but of course it's much wider than that. So we'll start to see some of those measures coming in the balance of this financial year. But we are very much on the early stages of that journey.
Okay, thank you.
Bella.
Chair, kia ora korua.
Kia ora.
Just on Air New Zealand being your core business, given their projections in terms of decreasing growth, revenue growth, primarily around domestic leisure passengers and international tourists incoming, I don't see any sort of adjustment for that. Is that a concern for you? And also their deferred revenue, CapEx, but I don't see any ATRs on there. So there's nothing that we need to consider that in terms of concerns.
Yeah, look, we take, I'll answer this in a couple of ways. Firstly, we budget conservatively, so our 1920 budget reflects a 5% increase in passenger numbers. And at the moment, as I say, we're running at about 8% on an annualised basis, so there's some protection there. And look, the sensitivity to the bottom line is modest. So for every 1% movement in passenger volume has about a $50,000 impact on profitability. So it's not, I don't see it as a major. I think the other aspect here is that we are growing faster as a port than virtually all other regional ports in New Zealand. So I think what underpins us, and I didn't spend any time on it, is the wide range of industries that we've got in the Waikato that are travelling, that I think are travelling, that are sensitive to perhaps the economic climate of the region or of the national economy, but we're more insulated potentially from Air New Zealand and the international leisure market that from an air perspective is very, very small for us.
And so you don't anticipate that also impacting on your hotel?
No, again, no, because we think that the hotel will be very much, the profile will be conferencing, will be business conferencing and event-driven, particularly events that are happening in right across the region, but particularly also in the Waipa region, Karapiro events, those sorts of events, Mystery Creek Field Days. So we think the span is wide enough that we've got a reasonable protection. However, we don't underestimate that the hotel market in Auckland is suffering now from a slight decline in occupancy rates. And that's as more hotels are coming online and international passenger visitor arrivals are sort of stabilising. So there is a danger on the horizon that could cascade out into this region from Auckland over the next, there's a lot of hotel rooms to come on market over the next 12 months to 2 years. So it's a watching brief.
Okay, thank you.
Dave.
Oh, thanks. And congratulations on the strategic visioning and planning. It's really impressive to see that look ahead. Look, just similar to one of the questions that Air Commodore Bunting over there asked earlier, the new ATR that Air New Zealand's getting, is that a longer range, bigger, more packs than passengers than it's just another one of the same?
It's just another one of the same. absolutely. It's a 68-seater, so it's just a new generation ATR. And I think that's and you would have seen some very brief commentary in the media around jet services out of regional airports, and you would have seen equally a very quick dismissal by Air New Zealand. Look, we're about to see jets reintroduced into Invercargill by Air New Zealand. And I think the challenge that we have over the medium term is that you can't fly further than Christchurch on an ATR, so you can't get to Dunedin.
I was going to check that because its range is theoretically more than 2 hours.
It can travel the distance, but the issue is that you and I don't want to sit in an ATR for close to 3 hours to get to Dunedin.
Yeah.
When we can go to Auckland and do it in an hour and a half or an hour,
You might be 3 hours driving to Auckland, of course.
Well, yeah, that's right. But, I mean, the opportunity, I think, is on selected routes for Air New Zealand to consider jet services. And I think our belief, when I say our, I think my colleagues around New Zealand, I think the belief is at some point it will make sense for jet services. But, look, with that comes a lot of cost because you've got to prepare the airports that can to handle the jet services. You've got automatic screening. Now that's the other point here. We just don't know what how the government may respond to Christchurch in respect of domestic screening of regional aircraft at a future point. We once heard that they would make a decision based on an event, and we've had an event, so how they respond to that. But we're not hearing anything. If anything, we're hearing very much a sort of a cold flannel on the head around any direct response to that terrorism event. So that's what I think will drive. So unintended consequences may drive different decision making going forward.
Okay, thanks.
Rob.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Mark, for your presentation. Just one quick question. You mentioned in the wrap-up that you're getting used to being new to running a hotel. I recall when we considered the company setup for the hotel, you were to be the lessor and not the operator. Is that still the case?
Yes, look, it was absolutely. So Jet Park we have a hotel management agreement. So Jet Park are the hotel manager. They are the operator of the hotel. And Rail is very much the owner of the land, the buildings,
the fit out and so forth.
And the hotel. So our Waikato Regional Airport Hotel Limited has that commercial relationship. My point was really somewhat humorously around the fact that if you own an asset like that and you employ a hotel manager, you need to be educated on ensuring that you're asking the right questions around the boardroom, and when we're reviewing the performance of the hotel, that we fully understand the inputs and the outputs from it.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you. We'll now move to the report. I've chased ahead. Okay, so what's the staff recommendation? Hang on a second. This is your thing.
Yeah, we have the revised staff recommendation, if I may. I think that's been put up. If I could just introduce it quickly. Mark referred to the strategic thinking of the airport company and the statement of intent, which has been tabled for you to receive. Since that was prepared, we've had further discussions with the airport company, particularly with regards the H2A or the Northern Corridor plan. And you'll recall that the Growth and Infrastructure Committee on the 12th of February noted that the Mayor and the Chairman of that committee would be talking to the airport board with regards issues to do with opportunities for runway extension and service expansion. And out of those discussions that were had, the board of Rail are going to or intend to engage much more fully in the H2A program or the Northern Corridor program and integrate the question over runway extension, protection of current rights and so forth through that program as a part of a joined-up discussion with other metro councils between Auckland and Hamilton. So the suggestion or the revised recommendation is merely for us to receive the statement of intent, but effectively ask that the Board of REL write into its statement of intent that its intention is to actively become engaged with the Northern Corridor discussions and projects. And I've had a verbal feedback to say that they will absolutely put that into the final draft or the final of the statement of intent to reflect that. So I'm just trying to ensure that we record our request to the board, that they take this consideration on board, and as I said, they have said they will.
So it's effectively in addition to the draft statement
Correct.
of intent, isn't it?
Yes, they'll just incorporate it into the draft. I mean, we are receiving the draft as it stands. We are effectively saying we've received your draft, but we are requesting or giving you our advice that we think you should incorporate into the draft your engagement with the Northern Corridor Plan.
Okay, do we have a seconder? Ryan, so... Okay, do we have any debate? Dave just said, nah. Okay, any questions on the, everyone understand what we're doing? All right, I'll move the, sorry, is there any debate? There's no debate? Okay, I will move the, pardon? Oh, sorry, I mean, we'll vote on that, sorry, and we'll vote on the recommendation, because that's now just a recommendation, it's not, yeah, okay. All right, those in favour, please say aye. Those against, no. No one against, carried, thank you, unanimously. I now suggest we, yeah, have smoker, yeah. Okay, so just want to get some logistics on this. Andrew, I'm not sure that your meeting's been publicly announced at 2 o'clock, isn't it? So. Oh, okay, all right. So, okay. All right, so we've got the annual monitoring report and the financial strategy monitoring report, then some public excluded stuff. Yep. So I suggest, is 1:45 okay for everyone? That gives you 35, 40 minutes for lunch. So 1:45 back here, and we'll finish off this meeting, and then Andrew's council meeting comes.